Chapter 922. A smile appeared on Christie's face, and she looked at Sherelle with even more respect. She had seen many successful people, and the higher they were, the more approachable they were. Of course, that wouldn't have been the case in other restaurants, but in Immerse, there were 2 10th-tier magic casters at the front of the line. Duke Abraham was also in the line, so Christie was a little worried that if the coachman tried to cut the line, he would be rejected by Mr. Mac. What if he got into a conflict with those powerful magic casters? The horse-drawn carriage stopped, and Sherelle followed Christie out of the carriage before walking straight to the back of the line. As he listened to the heated debates going on in the line, an expectant look appeared on Sherelle's face. In particular, the tofu pudding that he had heard the most arguments made him even more curious about what kind of food it was. Just what kind of food could make the customers so agitated just because of its taste? It was as if they were facing their mortal enemy. "Miss Christie, what is this tofu pudding? Why are these customers arguing over this?" Sherelle couldn't help but ask curiously when he reached the end of the line. Tofu pudding is a delicacy from Immerse. It has 2 flavors, sweet and savory. The line on the left is for the savory one, while the line on the right is for the sweet one. "I think the sweet tofu pudding is very delicious, and I suggest that you give it a try, Mr. Sherelle," Christie explained with a smile. "I see. This owner is really interesting. It's just a dish, but the customers are so protective of it. But I don't like sweet things, so I'll go with the savory tofu pudding," Sherelle said with a smile. He then walked to the back of the line on the left with a smile. Christie opened her mouth to say something, but she resisted the urge to persuade him. She only liked sweet tofu pudding, and she didn't dare to imagine how it would taste if such a delicious dessert was made into a savory tofu pudding. Of course, aside from bringing Sherelle to Mammy Restaurant for a meal, her main objective for coming here today was to eat another bowl of tofu pudding. This tofu pudding was really amazing. Due to her anxiety, a few red pimples had grown on her nose and face, and she couldn't get rid of them no matter how hard she tried. However, after eating a bowl of tofu pudding that day, the pimples on her face were all gone when she woke up the next morning. Furthermore, her skin was noticeably better. Even the best hydration potion on the market couldn't achieve such an effect, so Chris was naturally pleasantly surprised. The pimples were gone, but as a woman, how could she be satisfied? Whether it was to make her skin fairer and fairer, or to get rid of those little pimples that were almost invisible, it was all worth it to make this trip and line up for this long. At 5 o'clock, the door of the restaurant was opened. Meg welcomed the guests with a smile. "Hello, Mr. Meg." Chris took the initiative to smile and nod at Meg. The last time she was able to get money from Duke Meg was all because of the stinky tofu, so she was very grateful to Meg. According to the news from Rodu, the branch of Buffett Banks had already moved into the Duke's mansion, and they were still counting the money that the Duke had promised. Although the exact amount hadn't been released yet, the boss had already told her that the bonus alone was equivalent to her entire salary from last year. "Hello, Miss Chris." Meg also responded with a smile. He had some impression of this beautiful woman in a business suit, and her name was directly marked on the omniscient door. He had heard from Carla that this woman had exchanged half a helping of stinky tofu for a portion of Duke Abraham's money. Although it was a little tricky, it was enough to prove her business ability. Meg took a look at the old man who had followed Chris into the restaurant. He was wearing a loose black robe, and his hair and beard were all white. He looked quite benevolent and kind. A line of words floated across Meg's mind. "Mr. Sherelle, male, 65 years old, ordinary, suffers from coronary heart disease, often with symptoms of heart palpitations and chest pain. You can eat a roast duck wrapped in a lotus leaf cake to effectively relieve your symptoms." "Huh?" Mag raised an eyebrow. After making sure that he wasn't seeing things, a peculiar expression appeared on his face as he said internally, "System. Are you selling medicine now? You're writing prescriptions for people?" After the restaurant's upgrade, the omniscient door has also been upgraded accordingly. You can now recommend dishes according to the system's recommendations. The system's voice slowly sounded in Meg's mind. Dishes according to the symptoms. Why does it sound so weird? Meg curled his lips. But the system's ability did open up a shortcut for him to supplement his food. It completely saved him the trouble of ordering the wrong dish. Mr. Mac. A thin figure walked past Meg, greeted him, and quickly walked to the only seat left in the corner. Vicenio, male, 30 years old, ordinary, suffers from severe kidney deficiency, almost squeezed dry. Common symptoms are pain in the waist and knees, low spirits, impotence, premature ejaculation, and other symptoms. Can be prescribed 1 serving of black pepper steak and 2 largi ruggiamos. If taken continuously for a week, his condition will be effectively improved. But in the meantime, he must abstain from sex. Otherwise, his condition will worsen. Meg looked at Vicenio's thin figure with pity. It seemed that this man was also under unimaginable pressure. But why did Meg feel like laughing when he saw this prescription that didn't contain sugar for kidney deficiency? Shouldn't he be handed a box of treasure of kidney at this time? Without thinking too much, Meg turned and walked to the kitchen. A new round of challenges was about to begin. Wow, this Peking duck costs 2,000 copper coins per serving. It's so expensive. It's almost the same price as grilled fish. Yeah. It seems that we won't be able to eat it today. But, isn't this picture too tempting? How can a roast duck be roasted to such a golden red color? It's even more tempting than Ducas's roast pig. Although 2,000 copper coins is a little expensive, it says that it's suitable for 2 to 3 people. Are you guys interested in buying one? We'll split the cost. The customers opened the menu. After seeing the picture and the price of the roast duck, another round of whispers broke out. Sherelle also opened the menu, and his eyes lit up when he saw the picture of the roast duck. He smiled and said, "If this picture isn't fake, then this duck looks even better than the roast geese from Rodu's Roast Goose restaurant. Would you like to order one, Miss Christie?" Chapter 923. I'd like a roast duck. I'd like one for my table too. I'd like a portion of stinky tofu. Although the price of 2,000 yuan deterred many of the customers, there were still many who chose to wait and see for the time being. There were also some customers who showed off an even more miraculous operation after joining the table, joining dishes. This was something that even Meg had never seen before. For people he didn't know at all, and they were a combination of an orc, a demon, a human, and a dwarf, actually hit it off and decided to go Dutch and join forces to share a portion of Peking duck. This kind of thing could probably only happen at Mammoths. What an interesting dining environment. Elves and demons are sharing a table, while humans and orcs are sharing a table and eating the same dish. What kind of magic does the food here have? Sherelle looked at all of the customers in the restaurant with a hint of surprise on his face. He then turned to Mag, who was standing in the kitchen with a transparent window, and a smile appeared on his face. Just what kind of delicious food can such a young chef cook? I'm really looking forward to it. The roasting process that Mag was using had been optimized by the system. While maintaining the perfect flavor profile, the roasting process had been shortened from 40 minutes to 20 minutes. Furthermore, 10 roast ducks could be roasted in one go, which was undoubtedly a very fast roasting process. After the first roast duck was done, Meg slowly walked out of the kitchen with a cart. He stopped at Crassus' table and placed the lotus leaf cake, sweet sauce, onion, and cucumber strips in front of him. Why is Mr. Mac serving the food himself? Yeah, this is the first time I've seen Mr. Mac serve the food himself. Could it be that the way to eat this roast duck isn't simple? The customers all looked curiously at Meg and the big metal-covered plate on the cart. There was also a knife and a chopping board on the small cart. Sir Crassus, your Peking duck. Meg lifted the metal cover, and a plump, jujube red roast duck appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The surface of the duck glowed faintly under the light, and it emitted an alluring glow. Gulp. The sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard. Compared to the picture, the perfect roast duck presented in front of everyone was obviously more impactful. Since the stinky tofu hadn't been served yet, Meg didn't turn on the molecular isolation system. The aroma of the roast duck wafted through the air, and everyone's eyes lit up. This aroma is more than twice as strong as the roast goose in the roast goose house. It's just a duck. How can it be roasted with such a tempting aroma? Syrah, who was sitting not far away, stared at the red roast duck with incredulity in his eyes. The roast goose restaurant in Rodu was one of the restaurants that he frequented. Their roast goose was one of the best in Rodu, but it was easy to get sick of eating too much of it, so he would make a special trip there every 2 months or so. He didn't think that he would be able to find a roast duck that was even more enticing than the roast goose in Chaos City. Crassus's eyes also lit up, but when he saw the roast duck that was bigger than an ordinary duck, he smiled and said, "It's so big, are we going to eat it directly?" "No, we need to slice it." Meg shook his head with a smile. He put on a pair of disposable gloves before picking up his cleaver and the roast duck. Meg's heavy cleaver danced through the air, and one slice of roast duck after another fell onto the plate like snowflakes. They were arranged in a perfect line, creating a beautiful sight to behold. Even the skin and the meat were almost identical in thickness. The entire roast duck was arranged in different positions on different plates, and in the blink of an eye, there was only a duck rack left. This operation made the guests exclaim in admiration. The exquisite knife skills could only be described as superb. After the processing of the duck meat, the roast duck, which was already very tempting, was suddenly filled with a sense of ceremony, which made the guests look forward to it even more. Meg sliced off the duck's head and neck before placing them on a plate in front of Crassus with a smile, and said, "Duck meat will taste even better when dipped in sweet sauce. Dip duck meat in sweet sauce and put it in a lotus leaf cake, then add onions and cucumbers on top. Enjoy your meal." Full marks. Crassus gave Meg a thumbs up, and couldn't wait to pick up a piece of duck meat with his chopsticks. He dipped it in the sweet sauce in front of him, then picked up a thin piece of lotus leaf cake, and put it in the middle awkwardly. He then put a slice of onions and cucumbers into his mouth, wrapped them up casually, and stuffed them directly into his mouth. The wonderful taste blossomed in his mouth, and Crassus's face lit up. The wonderful taste was indescribable. The lotus leaf cake was soft yet flexible, and it was sweet and delicious. The tender duck meat and crispy duck skin complemented each other. It was fat but not greasy. The onions and cucumbers sandwiched in between were even more refreshing and greasy. He enjoyed the delicious taste in his mouth. Crassus swallowed the roast duck, and praised, "It's so delicious." Gulp. Everyone in the restaurant swallowed their saliva at the same time. Chris looked at Sherelle, who swallowed her saliva, and a smile appeared on her face. It seemed like she was in luck this time. "I suddenly feel that the 2,000 copper coins are so worth it. Not only is it a delicious experience, but it's also a feast for the eyes. I want an extra serving of Peking duck. Miss Mia, I want an extra serving of Peking duck too." The customers who were still watching raised their hands to place their orders, afraid that the 100 roast ducks would be sold out if they were late. Mr. Meg is really amazing. Whether it's his superb cooking skills or his amazing knife skills, and so many people like him. Phyllis looked at Meg, and secretly clenched her fists. "I must become a chef like him." It only took Meg 2 minutes to slice a roast duck, but every time he served a pot of roast duck, Meg had to spend more than 20 minutes to slice the duck. This made him even more determined to let Phyllis master the technique of slicing duck as soon as possible, so that she could do it for him. "Here's your roast duck, please enjoy." Mag placed the slices of duck meat in front of Christy and Sherry with a smile on his face. "I think it's going to be a delicious feast." Sherelle looked up at Meg with a sincere expression. He had eaten in all the restaurants in Rodu, but he had never seen a chef slice a duck in front of him. This made him feel very curious, and at the same time, he was also looking forward to it. "Thank you." Meg nodded slightly, and pushed the cart toward the kitchen. Chapter 9:24. There was no dipping sauce, no scallion or cucumber strips, and no thin lotus leaf pancake. It was just a thin slice of duck meat. As soon as it entered his mouth, the taste buds on the tip of his tongue were completely activated. He gently bit down, and the soft duck meat and crispy duck skin melted in his mouth at the same time. A rich and mellow fragrance instantly melted in his mouth. Amidst the rich aroma, the fruity aroma seemed so fresh and leisurely. "This taste is simply too delicious. I've traveled all over the Orc territory, and tasted countless delicacies roasted over fires. I've also tasted all of the top-tier restaurants in Rodu, but I've never tasted duck meat as delicious as this." Cheryl's eyes had completely lit up, and he couldn't help but praise. Roast Goose Restaurant's roast goose was one of the best in Rodu. It was a favorite of many nobles, and sold for 500 copper coins each. It wasn't something that ordinary people could afford. However, the roast goose from Roast Goose Restaurant, which claimed to be the best roast goose in the world, was nothing compared to this roast duck. It wasn't even worthy of being compared. I didn't think that I'd be able to eat such delicious roast duck in Chaos City. Let me try this dipping sauce again. Cheryl picked up a piece of duck meat with his chopsticks, dipped it in the thick sweet sauce, and put it into his mouth. After dipping it in the thick sauce, the sweetness didn't appear to be too strong, but it contained a unique sauce aroma. The roast duck was already very delicious, but its flavor was enhanced to a whole new level by the perfect amount of sweetness and the unique sauce aroma. If he had to find a word to describe it, it would probably be perfect. The sweet sauce was slightly sweet and had a unique sauce aroma. It didn't steal the roast duck's place as the main dish. Instead, it served as the finishing touch, and enhanced the roast duck's deliciousness to a whole new level. Sweet sauces are very rare in the past, and they're not my style. However, this sauce gives me a very appropriate feeling. Without it, this roast duck would be a lot less delicious. Cheryl was also looking at the sweet sauce with praise in his eyes. Try eating it according to Mr. Meg's classic recipe. At some point, Chris had wrapped a piece of duck meat, onion, and cucumber in mint ice and placed them in the middle of a small plate in front of Cheryl. Miss Chris is very considerate. His eldest granddaughter was about the same age as this Miss Chris. However, his eldest granddaughter was always fooling around outside. He only saw her a few times a year, let alone making roast duck for him. How could she be as considerate as Miss Chris? He picked up the small square wrapped in a lotus leaf cake that was as thin as paper. Under the light, he could almost see through it. 2 shredded scallions and 2 even thinner cucumbers were placed on top of the duck meat, looking very delicate. Syrah carefully examined it for a while before putting it into his mouth. The soft and chewy lotus leaf cake was still a little warm and had a faint fragrance. After biting into it, the roast duck dipped in sweet sauce began to blossom with a wonderful taste. The fresh cucumbers and scallions made crisp crunching sounds as he bit into them. The taste of freshness and fullness seemed to blossom on the tip of his tongue, instantly dispelling the trace of greasiness brought about by the sweet sauce and roast duck. What a wonderful combination. What an interesting way to eat it, but it's combined into a subduing delicacy. It's simply too amazing. Syrah almost slammed the table and stood up. He had eaten all over Rodu, but he had never tasted anything as delicious as this. 1 roast duck, 3 different ways of eating it, and 3 different culinary experiences. Syrah felt that his perception of Chaos City's food had been completely shattered by this roast duck. This city finally had a dish that could amaze him. It's so delicious that I don't want to stop eating. Cheryl picked up a piece of lotus leaf cake and began to wrap it with duck meat, onion, and cucumber strips. He then put the cake into his mouth, and a blissful smile appeared on his face as he savored the amazing taste of the cake. Is it really that delicious? Chris also had an expectant look on her face. She picked up a piece of lotus leaf cake and wrapped it up for herself. She put it in front of her mouth and took a graceful bite. Oh, this is so delicious. Chris's eyes almost immediately narrowed into slits, and she couldn't hide the elated smile on her face. Even though she was full of anticipation, she was still stunned by the delicious taste of the lotus leaf cake. Mr. Mac really is invincible when it comes to making ducks. Mr. Mac really is a genius when it comes to making duck. Mr. Mac's duck is so delicious. All of the customers were also full of praise for this Peking duck. They were completely immersed in Meg's fancy knife skills and the delicious taste of the roast duck. I didn't want to be a duck, so please be kind, everyone. Meg rolled his eyes in his heart, but he was still very happy to be praised by everyone. Aside from those freaks, there were very few people in this world who didn't feel anything when others praised them. I want a roast duck. I'm sorry, sir, but today's 100 Peking ducks are all sold out. If you want to try roast duck, please come back early tomorrow night. Yarbemir smiled and refused one request after another. He didn't seem to have any intention of negotiating. That customer still didn't give up. He poked his head into the kitchen and said to Meg, "Mr. Mac, it's still early. Why don't you make another pot of roast duck for us? With all of us working together, I'm sure it won't be a problem. What do you think?" All of the other customers who wanted to order roast ducks also looked in the direction of the restaurant, wondering if Meg would agree. "I'm sorry, sir, but to ensure the quality, we only prepare so many roast ducks every day. Today's duck is all sold out, so there's no more left. If you become more familiar with roast duck in the future, you might be able to roast more," Meg said with a smile. He also didn't seem to have any intention of negotiating. "This owner is really interesting. Can I have another helping of this tofu pudding?" Sherelle put down the spoon in her hand and looked at the empty bowl in front of her. She still wanted more. "Then Mr. Meg will probably say something similar to what you just said," Christy said helplessly. If possible, she also wanted another helping of tofu pudding. Sherelle was stunned for a moment, then smiled awkwardly. She looked at Meg's back in the kitchen, and couldn't help but sigh with emotion. There aren't many chefs in this world who take their food as seriously as he does. "Yes, Mr. Meg is a special chef." Christy nodded in agreement. She looked at Meg's back, and her eyes flashed slightly. That was a special kind of attraction. "Since we don't have the right to continue enjoying the food, let's go." Sherelle paid the bill and walked out of Mammoth with Christy. She looked at Christy with a smile, and said, "Today was the happiest meal I've had since I came back to Chaos City. I really have to thank you, Miss Christy. You're too kind. I should be the one thanking you for treating me to such a delicious roast duck." Christy shook her head with a smile. "Haha, you're so much more interesting than my disappointing grandchildren. If you're not in a hurry to go back, you can take a walk in the Aiden Square with me and chat." The night was getting darker, and the long line outside Mammoth had disappeared. It was undoubtedly true love that could endure hunger until now. However, the expansion of the restaurant and the improvement of Meg's cooking efficiency was also an important reason why most of the customers were satisfied before the restaurant closed. Ding! The restaurant door was pushed open with a soft sound. Chapter 9:25. Elliot stood at the entrance of the restaurant, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes as he looked at Sally, who was wearing a cheongsam and carrying a tray filled with bowls and plates. However, he didn't express it too much. After a brief silence, he smiled, and said, "I'm here to eat. Can I still eat now? Welcome. Opening hours are not over yet. If you'd like to place your order, please find a seat." Yarbemia stepped forward with a smile, and guided Elliot to his seat. "What's wrong, Aisha?" Mia asked softly as she nudged Sally with her elbow while Elliot was looking at the menu. This was the first time that she had seen such an expression on Sally's face. Shouldn't elves be happy to see other elves? I'm fine. Sally shook her head as she put away all of the dishes on the table before quickly making her way toward the kitchen. However, her hands suddenly trembled, and the messy stacks of plates fell to the ground, looking as if they were about to crash to the ground. Sally's expression changed slightly. She hadn't made such a low-level mistake in a long time. "Stop." Barbara, who was serving the dishes on the tray, pointed a finger, and the plates that were about to fall to the ground stopped in mid-air. She then waved her finger, and the plates stacked together before flying back to Sally's tray. "Be careful." Barbara walked past Sally, and winked at her. Sally nodded slightly, and walked toward the kitchen with the tray in her hands. A 7th-tier spatial magic caster? And a half-dragon and Sally? Who is the owner of such a small restaurant that has 2 7th-tier magic casters as waitresses? Elliot was looking at the menu, and he looked up at Barbara with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He then looked at Yarbemia with a curious expression as he turned toward the kitchen. Sally entered the kitchen, and closed the door behind her. She put down the plates in her hands, and walked over to Phyllis, who was watching Meg cook. Sister Aisha, you." Phyllis looked at Sally, and couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Sally whispered into Phyllis's ear, "Sure, Phyllis, don't say anything. The leader of the Brewster family is right outside. He might be coming for me, but if he finds out that you're here, he might take you away as well." Mag's hands faltered as he looked up at Sally and Phyrus, and a hint of resignation and disappointment appeared in his eyes. Even though this was within his expectations, he didn't think that it would come so quickly. Sally was going to leave in the end. After the Queen went into seclusion and Irina was deposed, the conflict between the factions in the Elven race became even more intense. It was no longer a secret that Borg was trying to become the first male ruler in the history of the Elven race, but Helena still insisted on promoting a new Elven princess and grooming her to become the new Elven Queen. Sally was at the top of Helena's list. What few people knew was that this young mistress of the Brunst family, who had been internally designated as the Elven Princess and even the future Elven Queen, was now working as a waitress in a restaurant in Chaos City. Meg had expected that the leader of the Brewster family would come to him in person, but when it really happened, he still felt a little sad. It would be very difficult to find such a well-rounded and outstanding employee again. However, if word got out that he had found an Elven princess to be the mother of his child, and had let another Elven princess work as a waitress in a restaurant for a few months, the enmity between him and the elves would most likely be irreconcilable. As for Phyllis, Meg wasn't worried that Elliot would take her away by force. If the leader of the Brewster family hadn't lost his mind, he probably wouldn't do anything to someone who Alex had brought to Chaos City. Besides, he probably didn't want too many people to know that he had come to Chaos City. A hint of panic flashed across Phyllis's eyes when she heard Sally's words. She looked out of the restaurant, and then back at Sally. She nervously and worriedly asked, "Big Sister Aisha, what about you?" Although she hadn't had much contact with Sally in the past 2 days, the fact that Sally, who was rumored to be in seclusion, had appeared in Chaos City and was working as a waitress in a restaurant meant one thing: Miss Sally had run away from home. The worst thing that could happen to someone who ran away from home was to be found. Now that Elliot had appeared in Amy's in person, could it be that he was here to bring Miss Sally back? "I'm fine. He's already seen me." A resigned smile appeared on Sally's face. She shook her head, and quickly regained her composure. She put the dishes she had just cleaned into the dishwasher, picked up the tray, and walked out of the door. Elliot looked away from Meg when he saw Sally coming out of the door. He looked at Sally, who was cleaning the tables and chairs skillfully with a little water magic, and the surprise in his eyes gradually turned into relief. When she was in the family, he had never seen Sally do such things. Although she wasn't lazy, she was too sharp, and couldn't calm down to do what he told her to do. She even imitated Irina and ran away from home. But now, her sharpness and pride seemed to have been restrained. She was still Sally, but she was no longer the Miss Sally. He thought he would be furious when he saw her again, but he was surprisingly calm, and even a little relieved. She's been walking for so long, but she stopped at Chaos City. What's attracting her here? Elliot thought to himself. This wasn't like his daughter who wanted to be like Irina. Sally had already calmed down. She didn't try to avoid Elliot's gaze, and did her work seriously and meticulously as usual. Elliot looked at Sally, who walked past him, and asked with a smile, "It's my first time here. Do you have any recommendations?" Sally stopped in her tracks, and was silent for a while. She turned around and looked into Elliot's eyes. She was silent for a while again, and was surprised by his calmness. Then, she flipped open the menu, and said, "You can try the black pepper steak. If you want a drink, you can order a glass of beer." "All right, I'll take those too," Elliot said as he closed the menu. "Give me a moment." Sally nodded slightly, and turned to walk into the kitchen. Not long after, the steaming steak and bubbling beer were served on the dining table and placed in front of Elliot. Chapter 926. The steak knife wasn't very sharp, but it was still able to slice open the tender steak with ease. Red wine and meat juices flowed out, and the aroma of the steak became even more pronounced, making Elliot's throat twitch involuntarily. He picked up a small piece of steak with his fork and placed it into his mouth. He took a gentle bite, and delicious meat juices flowed out from the tender beef. The aroma of black pepper was just right, and the delicious flavor danced on the tip of his tongue, making a blissful smile appear on Elliot's face. This wonderful feeling was simply too inconceivable. Compared to this, the so-called delicacies he had tasted in the Wind Forest were like heaven and earth. Tang Wulin felt as if he could sense the vitality of the beef, and he could tell that this was definitely a perfectly healthy ironhide bull. What was even more incredible was that the red wine that had been added to the steak was like a treasure hidden in the depths of the forest. It was irresistibly intoxicating. This was a delicious feast, and he was completely intoxicated by it. After swallowing a mouthful of beef, he felt as if a ball of warmth had flowed down his throat, providing the most gentle comfort to his famished stomach. One mouthful after another, Elliot's knife and fork didn't stop for a single moment. This type of delicacy was simply irresistible, and he simply couldn't stop himself. Ding! The knife and fork clanged against the empty plate. Elliot looked at the empty plate in front of him, and was a little surprised that he had already finished a portion of steak, but he still hadn't had his fill. Who would have thought that there would be such delicious food in this world? No wonder Sally didn't want to leave after coming here. There's probably no other place in this world that's more enticing than this, Elliot lamented to himself. All of his previous suspicions about whether Sally had been forced into this place had been completely erased. Elliot put down his knife and fork and picked up the beer that had been sitting beside him for a while. Within the large crystal glass was a clear golden beer. 2/3 of the beer was alcohol, while the other third was white foam. Could it be barley wine? Elliot was a little perplexed as he brought the glass closer to him. As soon as the glass came into contact with him, a faint aroma wafted toward him. It was elegant yet not pungent. It smells so good. It smells like barley wine, but the aroma is softer. Perhaps it's an improved version? Why don't you try it? Elliot raised his glass and took a sip. The wine in the early winter was slightly cold, but the taste was very refreshing and mellow without losing its mellowness. Unlike barley wine, which was hard to conceal its bitterness, the wine was harmonious and soft, and had a strong killing power. Although there was a trace of bitterness, it was exceptionally delicate, weak, and slightly pleasant. There was no aftertaste, nor was there a lingering aftertaste. After swallowing it, one could not help but want to take another sip. Gulp, gulp. Elliot tilted his head back and quickly downed the large glass of beer. Elliot put down the glass. There was still some white foam on the glass. He burped and looked at Sally. "Give me another steak and a glass of beer." Sally looked at the time and shook her head. "The restaurant's business hours are about to end. We won't be serving any more food." "Is that so? Looks like I'll have to come over earlier tomorrow." Elliot was a little disappointed, but he didn't say much. He took out a purse from his waist and smiled at Sally. "Shall we settle the bill?" After business hours were over, all the customers had left. Sally looked at Yarbemia and the others. "You guys can go back first. I have to go somewhere after the restaurant is cleaned, so I'll be back later." "Okay, then you should go back earlier too." Mia nodded. She left with Barbara and Phyllis, who had a scarf wrapped around her face and ears. The gentle water cleansed every nook and cranny of the restaurant, and they surrounded Sally as if they were little elves that were obedient to her commands. Meg stood off to the side and looked at this scene in silence. Amy had already gone upstairs to play in her playground. The flowing water disappeared, and the restaurant looked brand new. The green leaves in the glass vases exuded vitality, and no ashes could be seen in the corners. Sally turned to Meg and said calmly, "Boss, I may have to go. Are you going back?" Meg also asked calmly. "Yes." Sally nodded as she looked at Mag. She then turned her gaze to the restaurant, and a smile appeared on her face as she said, "I wanted to travel the entire Norland continent, but I didn't think that I'd stop at Chaos City. It's a little different from what I had envisioned, but I feel like I've had a lot of fun during this time. I've made new friends, so there's nothing to regret." Meg looked at Sally. Although this girl didn't smile often, she looked even prettier when she smiled. Mag was Mammy Restaurant's second customer and second waiter. He was a capable employee who was responsible for all the work, such as the finances, cleaning, and clearing the tables. He was also a very pleasant friend whom Mag got along very well with in both work and life. He was about to leave, so Mag couldn't help but feel a little reluctant. If he could, of course, he would want her to stay. However, he obviously couldn't. Besides, it had to be Sally's choice to leave or stay. She could return to the Wind Forest and become the new elven princess, continue to work at Amy's as a waitress, or go on the road of escape again. The latter two options were no longer an option after the head of the Brewster family came to her in person. Sally looked at Meg for a long time, and finally said, "Thank you." Meg smiled, and said, "Are you leaving tonight, or can you wait until tomorrow? If it's possible, I want to have dinner with all of us again to see you off. I don't like parting. If it's possible, I hope you can tell them after I leave. I'll go to Amy's parent-teacher conference with you tomorrow." Sally shook her head. She blushed at the mention of the parent-teacher conference, and looked away from Meg to a green leaf. "Okay." Meg nodded. "I'm leaving now." Sally took her coat and walked out of the door. "Life is really—" Meg raised his eyebrows. He walked slowly to the door, locked it, turned off the light, and walked to the stairs. He couldn't help but smile when he saw Amy sitting on the stairs with Ugly Duckling in her arms. "Come back with me, Sally," Elliot said with a smile when he saw Sally coming out of the restaurant. Chapter 9:27. "All right, we'll go back to the forest at this time tomorrow night." Elliot nodded. "All right." Sally nodded. This conversation between father and daughter ended far sooner than Sally had anticipated. She was still in a bit of a daze as she watched Elliot disappear from the square. Has he changed? Sally was a little perplexed as she stood on the spot for a while before quickly departing as well. Not long after that, someone arrived at a small courtyard in the Elven Embassy in Chaos City. Following that, a conversation between two young people ensued. At some point, magic waves erupted, but they quickly disappeared. After the person left, Blower stood in the courtyard with a disconsolate expression. "Why is he so mean to me? My apologies, young Mistress Elizabeth. It took me so long to bring you food, you must be starving." Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth with an apologetic expression as he put down the box of Yangju fried rice in his hand. "It's all right, I'm not hungry." Elizabeth looked up at Yarbemia, and hesitated momentarily before turning away. "I want to drink some water." "Water?" "Then the water dispenser." Yarbemia faltered momentarily before coming to his senses. He then apologized. "I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you how to use the water dispenser. I'll go get you some water first." Elizabeth looked at Yarbemia's back resentfully. Why did she have to say something so embarrassing? And, why is the water coming out of that small pipe? Is there a fountain under the house? She wondered. She was not sure if there was a fountain under the house. Yarbemia soon returned with a large glass of water. Elizabeth accepted the glass gracefully before downing the entire glass in one gulp. "I'll go get you another glass." Yarbemia accepted the glass in a natural manner before turning around to pour another glass of water. Elizabeth was much more elegant this time. After drinking more than half of the water in one gulp, she opened the box of Yangju fried rice and began to eat with a spoon. Yarbemia gently closed the door and looked at Elizabeth, who was eating quietly by the bed. Her complexion was much better than yesterday, but she still looked weak and pale, perhaps because she had lost too much blood. After a moment of hesitation, she carefully sat at the end of the bed. "Thank you," Elizabeth said to Yarbemia. She paused in the middle of her meal and turned to look at her. You're welcome." Yarbemia stood up and waved his hand nervously. Elizabeth finished her dinner quickly. There was not a single grain of rice left in the box. Yarbemia tidied up the lunchboxes and poured Elizabeth a glass of water. She took the quilt out of the wardrobe and prepared to make the bed on the floor. "Are you going to sleep on the floor tonight?" Elizabeth asked Yarbemia, who was hugging the quilt. "Yes, I am." Yarbemia nodded. When he saw Elizabeth's unhappy expression, he hurriedly said, "Did I disturb you when you were sleeping last night? If that's the case, I can sleep on the sofa in the living room. This bed is quite big. I can't sleep on it alone. I'll sleep on the inside. You can sleep on the other side." Elizabeth retracted her gaze and said calmly. However, she could not help but tighten her grip on the cup. "Ah!" Yarbemia was stunned. He thought he had misheard. He looked at Elizabeth in disbelief and asked uncertainly, "Can I sleep on the bed too? If you don't like it, you can sleep on the floor." Elizabeth finished the water in the glass and lay down on the bed. She pulled the glass over her body and turned her back to Yarbemia. Yarbemia hugged the quilt and hesitated for a while. In the end, he stuffed the quilt back into the wardrobe. He carefully laid down on the other side of the bed. Then, inch by inch, he inched inwards until his body touched the edge of the bed and the quilt covered his body. He immediately stopped and lay straight like a log. He whispered, "Miss Elizabeth, can you turn off the light now?" "Yes." Why Elizabeth gave a lukewarm response, but a faint smile appeared on her face. For some reason, she found Yarbemia's cautious and clumsy demeanor to be rather adorable. Yarbemia reached out to turn off the bedside lamp. The room fell into darkness and silence. She tried hard to control her breathing. She did not even dare to breathe too loudly. She could hear her heart thumping loudly. Apart from that day when she fell asleep on the bed, this was the first time she slept on the same bed as someone else after her mother passed away. It was a strange feeling. The other party was a noble giant dragon and a powerful one. Yet, he allowed her to sleep on the same bed as him. Miss Elizabeth is such a good person, Yarbemia thought to herself. She had probably forgotten that this bed belonged to her. While Elizabeth was also in a strange mood. She had never slept on the same bed as anyone else, not even her mother. As far as she could remember, she had never slept on the same bed as her mother. Giant dragons were a symbol of strength. They had to learn to be independent from a young age. That was why she rarely felt intimate with her mother, even though she knew that her mother loved her deeply. But now, the one lying beside her was her younger sister. They shared the same father, but she rarely saw him. Mia had never even seen his face. It was such a similar experience that made her heart ache. The attraction that came from the depths of her heart made her heart throb. She even wanted to turn around and give her a hug. This was a thought that even she could not believe. Just like that, the two of them remained silent, and silent. Then, they both fell asleep. The next morning, Yarbemia woke up in a daze. She felt that the blanket was heavier and warmer than usual. Light shone into the room through the screen. When Yarbemia opened her eyes, she saw a face that was very close to her. Yarbemia woke up immediately. Her eyes widened as she stared at the face that was so close to her in disbelief. Her skin was as white as snow, smooth and flawless. Her nose was straight, and her eyelashes were long. But none of this was important. The most important thing was, how did she end up in the middle of the bed? And how did she end up in Miss Elizabeth's arms? Their bodies were almost completely pressed together. "I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead for sure this time." Yarbemia's heart was pounding, and her mind was completely blank. But, it's so warm, so comfortable. Although her mind was blank, her body still gave Yarbemia honest feedback about her current condition. Chapter 9:28. She was most afraid of the sudden silence. Yarbemia's expression froze. Before she could retract the comfortable smile on her face, her eyes were gradually filled with fear. Elizabeth's expression was a little strange. She was also a little flustered. She didn't know when she had wrapped her arms around Yarbemia so naturally. No matter how she looked at it, it seemed like she was the one who had initiated it. This. Elizabeth felt her face begin to heat up. Although the bed wasn't small, the two of them were so close that they were practically stuck together. Moreover, the size of their breasts was indeed larger than a normal person's. Although it was a soft and warm feeling, she still felt a little embarrassed. She had never been so close to anyone before. Moreover, they had been in this state for an entire night. Elizabeth's fair face flushed red at the thought of this. However, when she looked at Yarbemia, who seemed to be in a daze, she couldn't bear to throw her out. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Instead, they continued to be in a stalemate. After her mind went blank for a moment, Yarbemia gradually calmed down. She couldn't help but feel a little amused when she saw the blush on Elizabeth's fair face. She didn't expect Miss Elizabeth to blush too. Feeling her breathing gradually becoming heavier and her heartbeat so close to her, she was even more surprised. If that was the case, Miss Elizabeth would also be nervous. While Yarbemia was still curious, Elizabeth's embarrassed and angry voice sounded, "Are you going to keep lying down?" "Ah." Yarbemia snapped out of her daze and jumped up from the bed. She took 2 steps back and said apologetically, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Miss Elizabeth. I don't know how I ended up in the middle of the bed. I'm thirsty. Elizabeth sat up. She had regained her composure. She turned her face to look out the window and interrupted Yarbemia. I'll get you some water. Yarbemia quickly stopped herself and put on her slippers. She opened the door and walked out. This girl. The corners of Elizabeth's mouth curled up into a smile. She raised her hand and stretched her waist, revealing her beautiful figure. She thought to herself, it seems that I haven't had such a good sleep for many years. So it's because I'm hugging her that I feel so safe and comfortable. Water. Yarbemia carefully handed the cup over. She secretly looked at Elizabeth and felt uneasy. Thank you. Elizabeth took the cup and took 2 sips. She raised her head and looked at Yarbemia and said, I have to go. Oh. So soon? Yarbemia was slightly taken aback, and she couldn't hide the longing on her face. There are some things that must be done. Elizabeth nodded. But your body. Yarbemia wanted to say something, but she stopped herself. It's almost healed. Don't underestimate a giant dragon's regenerative abilities. When you become a true giant dragon, you'll understand how powerful giant dragons are. Elizabeth put down the cup and smiled confidently. Yarbemia was still worried. I don't know what happened to Miss Elizabeth, but if you're still in danger, you can stay here. It's safe here. There's no need for that. Elizabeth stood up and pressed her hand on the table. A small and exquisite blue gemstone ring appeared on the table. Thank that elf for me. Keep this ring for me. I'll come and find you again. A snowflake appeared under Elizabeth's feet. The temperature in the room dropped by a few degrees. She disappeared in a flash of white light. If only I could come back. A murmur echoed in the air. Miss Elizabeth. Yarbemia looked at the empty room, and a sense of loss welled up in her heart. After a while, Yarbemia walked to the table and picked up the ring. Her eyes lit up and she couldn't help but praise, what a beautiful ring. The blue gemstone in the shape of a droplet was clear and transparent. There were no impurities. The silver ring was like a snowflake. There were intricate dragon patterns carved on it. Can I put it on? Yarbemia hesitated for a while. In the end, she shook her head. She took out a piece of cloth from the wardrobe and wrapped the ring carefully. She carefully placed it in the innermost corner of the wardrobe. I hope Miss Elizabeth can come back safely. Even if you become a true giant dragon, you'll still encounter danger. After all, there are humans in this world who can slay giant dragons. For example, Alex, who is famous for being a dragon slayer. Yarbemia thought to herself. She paused and said with fear, Alex must be very fierce. Even a giant dragon would be afraid of him. I hope I won't meet him in my life. Has she left already? Sally, who had just woken up and washed up, looked at Yarbemia's room. She couldn't help but sigh in relief. She wanted to talk to Miss Dragon before she left, but it seemed that there was no need for that now. Aisha. Yarbemia just opened the door. When she saw Sally, she quickly walked up to her with a smile, and said, Good morning. Miss Elizabeth just left. She asked me to thank you. Good morning, MIA. You're welcome. Sally nodded. Every time she saw Mia's energetic smile, she would be affected by her and become more cheerful. MIA held Sally's hand and said seriously, but apart from that, I have something to ask of you. There's an orc who wants to celebrate his 5-year-old son's birthday at the ice cream shop tomorrow afternoon. His son is very sick, and the doctor said he won't live for long. However, he still wants to see snow, so if it's possible, I'm sorry, MIA. I won't be able to help you tomorrow because I have to go somewhere tomorrow. Sally looked at MIA and shook her head apologetically. Is that so? MIA was slightly disappointed, but she quickly shook her head with a smile and said, It's all right, I can think of another way. You can go do your own things, Aisha. Okay. Sally nodded slightly and walked toward the bathroom. This girl always puts others first. My heart aches for her. After waking up early in the morning, Meg sat at his desk and began to draft a recruitment notice. However, after racking his brain for an hour and tossing a trash can full of drafts, he still couldn't come up with a satisfactory one. In this world, looks and abilities can never be equated with a low salary. Meg sighed. Chapter 929. Meg was the only one who knew that Sally was leaving, so the atmosphere in Amy's was still as harmonious as before. Meg didn't like separation, and he didn't like to be separated from others, so he followed Sally's instructions and didn't tell anyone else about it. However, when he saw the head of the Brewster family sitting leisurely in the restaurant and ordering food, he almost couldn't help but put some drugs in the food. But he held himself back in the end. After all, this was Sally's payment, and she was also a customer of the restaurant. Halfway through cooking, Meg saw George packing up a portion of braised chicken and rice and was about to leave. He hurriedly put down the spatula and chased after George, who was already out of the restaurant, and quickly walked up to him. "Mr. Mac, what's the matter?" George stood at the entrance of the restaurant and asked Meg with a smile as he pushed the door open. Meg walked up and said a little awkwardly, "Amy and the others are going to have a parent-teacher conference. I haven't attended one before, so I don't know what to prepare. George, you must be more experienced than me, so I wanted to ask for your advice. This afternoon, right? I almost forgot that Mr. Mac is also going to attend the parent-teacher conference." George looked at Meg with a smile and said, "Mr. Mac, you don't have to be too nervous about the parent-teacher conference. The children are so young. In fact, the school gives us a chance to interact with the children and give them a little more care. Generally, parents only need to go alone. There are also some parents who bring some snacks for their children or make their own desserts." "Oh, I see." Meg's eyes lit up, and he suddenly understood. As expected, he was too serious. He smiled and said, "Thank you. When you're free, bring sister-in-law and the children over for dinner." "Okay, Mr. Mac, go do your work," George replied with a smile. When Amy returned to the restaurant at noon, she ran to the kitchen door expectantly and asked Meg, "Father, are you really going to the parent-teacher conference this afternoon?" "Yes. It's Amy's first parent-teacher conference. Of course I'm going." Meg turned around and smiled. "That's great." Amy was so happy that she jumped on the spot, but soon calmed down and whispered to Meg, "Then, what about Mother? Did you settle it?" Phyllis, who was cutting vegetables, her ears twitched, and a look of concern appeared on her face. "Your big sister Sally agreed," Meg replied in the same whisper. "Dad's SSSSSSSSS. It's not Mrs. Amy SSSSS. Why is. But, during the recruitment, this should be considered one of my jobs, right? Phyllis explained to herself. "Phyllis, you don't have to practice roasting beef kebabs this afternoon. Come with me to the market after the restaurants. You need to learn how to slice duck this afternoon." Meg's words interrupted Phyllis's train of thought. You want me to slice roast duck?" Phyllis was taken aback, and then a look of nervousness and uneasiness appeared on her face. It was different from slicing vegetables in the kitchen. She had to slice roast duck in front of the customers. With so many customers watching, she was a little scared. "Yes. You're the only one in the restaurant who can do that. I need your help." Meg looked at Phyllis with a sincere expression. "But..." Phyllis looked into Meg's eyes, which were filled with trust, and calmed down a lot. However, she was still a little worried. There are too many customers in the restaurant right now, and slicing roast duck is a very time-consuming task. I need to spend more time on cooking, so I can only leave this important task to you. "I believe you can do it well," Meg said with a smile, and his eyes were filled with encouragement. Phyllis felt as if she would be committing a crime if she refused. After hesitating for a long time, she nodded, and said, "Then, I'll give it a try. All right, let's eat." Meg nodded with a smile, and then walked out with the roast fish that had just been taken out of the pot. "We're eating 15 minutes early today, and it's so sumptuous. Could it be that today is a good day?" Yarbemia looked at the table filled with delicacies, and there was even a glass of beer in front of everyone. He looked at Meg with curiosity. Aside from the stinky tofu, all of the dishes on the menu have been served. Barbara also swallowed her saliva. This was the most sumptuous meal she had ever seen at Mammoth's. "All of my favorite dishes have been served," Amy said with an elated expression as she held back Ugly Duckling, which was trying to poke its head out of the table. Everyone looked at Meg. He was indeed acting a little strange today. There was no guarantee that they would be able to finish all of the dishes. Sally's eyes flashed slightly. She knew why this was the case. I feel that we haven't had a good gathering at Mammy Restaurant for quite some time. Since we're all fated to be together, I hope that even if we part ways one day, there will still be some beautiful memories in our hearts. Mammy Restaurant's doors will always be open for all of you. Mag raised his wine glass with a smile and said, "Cheers." "Cheers." Everyone raised their glasses and clinked them with smiles on their faces before taking a big gulp. Amy also raised her ice cream and took a big lick of it with elation. Lunch concluded on a happy note. Meg's smile widened at the sight of Sally's beaming face. She might not like the life she was going to live, but this was her choice, so he decided to respect it. If she were to take control of that forest, things would definitely be a lot better than it was now. In any case, Irina wasn't very interested in becoming the Elven Queen. After lunch, Mag and Firis made a trip to the market, where they bought 10 ducks that were similar in size to the 3 flower ducks. They entrusted the duck sellers with the task of processing the ducks before bringing them back to the restaurant and placing them into the oven in batches. For a roast duck of this size, it's best to slice it into 108 slices. This is a very strange number. Slicing more doesn't show your skill, but slicing less doesn't show your skill. It's best to slice it just right. Let's slice it from here first, then. After the first roast duck was cooked, Meg began to explain to Phyllis in detail how to slice the duck and analyze its skeleton. Chapter 930. Chaos School's Parent-Teacher Conference could be considered as a grand event in Chaos City. There was only one school in Chaos City, and it was the city with the highest basic education rate on the Norland continent. Most of the young residents of Chaos City had studied in Chaos School, or their children had studied in Chaos City. Therefore, on this day, as long as someone applied for leave for the Parent-Teacher Conference, no boss would make things difficult for them. There were all kinds of carriages and horses parked in front of Chaos School. Although there were many of them, they didn't look messy at all. They were parked in an orderly manner under the command of the students' parents. The students' parents weren't dressed too extravagantly like they would for a banquet. Instead, they were dressed appropriately. This was one of the traditions of Chaos School's Parent-Teacher Conference. Although there were no restrictions, even the nobles and tycoons had to keep a low profile on this day. There was a principle in Chaos School: only the wise and the strong would be respected among their peers. Therefore, the way the parents dressed didn't actually have much of a positive impact on their children. This was determined by Chaos School's ethos. However, if they stood out too much in the crowd, their children would be looked at differently, which wasn't a good thing. As such, when Mag arrived at the entrance of Chaos School with Sally on his bicycle, wearing a casual suit and black leather shoes, and carrying a long box wrapped in black cloth on his back, he was quite surprised. He had thought that he would be able to enjoy a unique fashion show, but was instead surprised to find that he was very conspicuous on his bicycle. What's he riding? Why does it have 2 wheels? What's that on his back? A long black box. Wow, that elf is so beautiful. She's already a mother at such a young age. The parents who were entering the school were whispering to each other as they looked at Meg and Sally. Being stared at by so many people as Amy's mother, Sally was also a little nervous. She whispered, "Bo. Meg, what should we do now? Let's park the bicycle first, and then get ready to enter. The parent-teacher conference is about to begin." Meg, on the other hand, was very calm. He looked around and saw a familiar face. He pushed his bicycle to the side. "Mr. Mac, you're here." George was wearing a yellow singlet of unknown numbers, and he smiled at Mag and Sally. He immediately guessed why Sally had come here, but he didn't say anything. "Yeah, can I park my car here?" Meg nodded with a smile. "Of course. There's no better place to park than Mr. Mac's carriage here." George nodded, and stepped aside to make room for Meg. What kind of treasure did Mr. Mac bring? George asked curiously as he looked at the long black box slung over Meg's shoulder. "Secret." Meg smiled, picked up the insulated box in the basket, and waved at George. "See you later. Let's go in first." "Okay, see you later." George nodded with a smile. He looked at the box in Meg's hand, scratched his head, and murmured, "What kind of treasure did Mr. Mac bring? Why are you being so secretive?" Chaos School covered a large area. According to the age and stage of the students, it was divided into two sections, the kindergarten section and the how high section. The parent-teacher conference was only for the students in the kindergarten section. According to the principal, the students in the how high section were already at the stage of living and learning independently. When they officially needed to be independent from their parents, there was no need for parent-teacher conferences. However, there were close to 20,000 students in the kindergarten section. According to the school's request, both parents of the children were expected to be present at the same time. It was equivalent to 60,000 people entering the kindergarten section at the same time. Luckily, Chaos School is really big. Mag couldn't help but sigh as he walked in the school and looked at the dense crowd that was slowly moving forward. So being a parent is such a joyful thing. Sally walked beside Meg and looked at the smiles on the faces of the parents. She couldn't help but feel a little touched. Children seemed to be a very distant thing to her. After all, before she left the wind forest, she was just a child in everyone's eyes. Now, she was here as Amy's mother to attend her parent-teacher conference. Although it was a pretense, she still felt a little strange. Meg and Sally's team was quite eye-catching because of the long box wrapped in black cloth on Meg's back. If it weren't for the fact that they didn't look like bad guys, some parents would have already checked what Meg was carrying. There! Mag caught sight of Luna, who was standing at the door of the classroom with a smile on her face, and he walked over to her with Sally in tow. "Mr. Meg, you." Luna looked at Meg, and soon noticed Sally standing beside Meg. She hesitated for a moment, and then quickly recovered. A smile appeared on her face again, and she said, "You're here." "Yes, Teacher Luna," Meg replied with a smile. "Father." Amy, who was sitting beside Daphne, waved happily at Meg. Then, her gaze landed on Sally, and she called out sweetly, "Ari." "Mother." The little one's soft voice attracted the attention of many parents. When they saw the sweet and adorable little Amy with a pair of pigtails, their eyes lit up immediately. "This little girl is so cute. Mother, she's the Amy I told you about. She's the one who knows super powerful magic. These parents are so lucky. Not only is this child beautiful, she's also super talented." Everyone turned their envious and jealous gazes toward Meg and Sally, who were standing at the door. The man was about 30 years old. He was wearing a black shirt and long pants. The style was very novel, and it was very obvious that he had a perfect figure. He had a handsome face, and a faint mustache above his upper lip. His eyes were warm and bright, and he made people feel that he was very approachable. The elf beside him looked like a young girl. Her slender figure was perfectly accentuated by the tight-fitting cheongsam that she was wearing, and her cold and beautiful face made people feel that she was unapproachable. The two of them stood at the door, and it was as if they were a pair of jade statues. They didn't wear any jewelry, nor did they exude any domineering aura, but they still made people unable to look away. "I'm impressed that they can give birth to such a child," a parent murmured. Many parents nodded reflexively. Chapter 931. Meg finally began to feel a little nervous at the sight of so many pairs of eyes staring at him. After all, Amy was going to start taking cultural classes next year, and all of the children here would be her classmates. He couldn't allow Amy's relationship with her classmates to be affected because of him. Thus, he turned to Luna, and asked in a quiet voice, "Are we going in right away?" "Yes, just sit down next to little Amy. There are still some parents who haven't arrived yet, so we'll have to wait for a while." Luna nodded with a smile. She couldn't help but take a glance at the long black box on Meg's back, but she didn't ask any questions. Meg and Sally made their way into the classroom, and nodded with a smile at all of the parents who were looking at them. He was very familiar with this kind of thing, and he would do it every day before school opened, so there was no issue with his friendliness at all. Seeing the smile on Meg's face, all of the parents who were looking at him with suspicion faltered momentarily before smiling back at him. Amy had defeated the Roth Empire Academy on her own, and was already a rising star in Chaos School. At the same time, She was also the disciple of 2 10th-tier magic casters. Of course, it couldn't be better for their children to be in the same class as her. Even if it wasn't to the extent of fawning over her, there was no need for them to put on such long faces. "Hello, Uncle Meg." "Hello, Auntie Aisha." Daphne greeted Meg and Sally, who were sitting next to Amy. She had eaten at the restaurant before, but Amy must have told her in advance. Even though she hesitated for a moment, she didn't make it too obvious. "Hello, Uncle, Auntie." Ignatsu, who was sitting in the back row with a little bean sprout on his head, also greeted them. "Hello, Daphne, Ignatsu." Meg also greeted Daphne and Ignatsu's parents with a smile. Daphne's grandfather had brought her to the last gathering, so this was the first time Meg was meeting Daphne's parents. However, because of Amy and Daphne's relationship, they didn't seem too distant. Daphne's father, Drew, was a mercenary just like her grandfather, Guy. He had a strong build and was a rank 2 knight. His personality was simple and honest. Meg would also meet Ignatsu's parents for the first time. His father, Shozo, was a plant-type demon and a magic caster. He worked in the City Lord's castle and specialized in plant-type magic. From his messy hairstyle and crumpled clothes, Meg could basically deduce that he had just been dragged out of the laboratory by the red-haired demoness, Bonnie. "Mr. Meg, it's a pleasure to meet you. If it weren't for the limited space, I would really want to show you my newly invented explosive vine ball." "Ah!" Shozo looked at Meg with excitement. Shozo's expression immediately twisted, and he swallowed his words. Bonnie, who was sitting beside him, smiled at Meg and Sally, and said, "Hi, Mr. Meg and Ms. Aisha. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for inviting Ignatsu to your gathering. I haven't had the chance to thank you yet." "You're welcome. Ignatsu and Daphne are Amy's good friends. It's my honor to have the children come to the gathering." Meg smiled in response. It seemed that this Mr. Shozo was indeed a research maniac. Even if he came to the parent-teacher conference, he still only had magic in his mind. The 3 pairs of parents chatted with each other. Apart from Sally, who was a little awkward, the atmosphere was quite harmonious. "I didn't think that I would one day be sitting in a classroom for a child's parent-teacher conference and talking about children with other parents." Meg lamented in his heart. The nervousness of attending a parent-teacher conference for the first time had almost disappeared without him noticing. However, Sally, who was sitting beside Meg, was getting more and more nervous. "Ms. Aisha, I have a question that I'm very curious about. Do elves feel pain when giving birth? When I gave birth to my child, it was so painful that I wanted to die." Bonnie looked at Sally curiously. Sally's face was full of embarrassment. She wanted to dig a hole and hide in it. How was she supposed to know such a question? She had never given birth before, okay? Meg wanted to, but there was nothing he could do. It was obviously inappropriate for a man like him to butt in on such a private topic. Moreover, he really didn't know that elves also felt pain when giving birth. Fortunately, it was time, and most of the parents had arrived. Luna walked up to the podium and gestured for everyone to quiet down, just in time to help Sally out of her predicament. The classroom quickly quieted down. The parents all sat up straight, as if they had returned to the classroom. "Dear parents, thank you for taking the time to attend the parent-teacher conference. I am Ms. Luna, the head teacher of the 2nd class." Meg realized that the parent-teacher conference in this world was not much different from the one on Earth. The teacher briefly talked about the performance of the middle school students in the past half a semester. Of course, most of it was praise. There were also a few troublemakers, but she only gave them a little advice in a gentle way. Then, it was time to reward the top students who had made great progress in their studies. Small awards and small gifts made the children and their parents very happy. Wasn't the happiest thing in a parent-teacher conference to hear the teacher praise their children? Because Amy didn't participate in the cultural classes, these things had nothing to do with Meg and Amy. They were only responsible for applauding. "I want a certificate too." Amy rested her chin on Mag's hand on the table as she looked at the children who were going up on stage to receive their awards enviously. Meg patted Amy's head with his other hand and smiled. "You'll get one when Amy starts studying." Daphne had already received 3 awards and 3 books. Her parents were full of smiles. Daphne's grades were among the top 3 in the class. Palmer also received 2 awards. Gilgy looked at the awards with a big smile on his face. Ignatsu, who was sitting in the corner, also didn't get a single award. Shozo didn't care. He played with the 2 dark green seeds in his hand, but Bonnie, who was sitting to Ignatsu's right, looked at him with a stern expression. Ignatsu looked at his mother carefully. When he met her stern gaze, he said meekly, "Amy didn't get one either." Luna took out a certificate that was twice as big as the previous one and said with a smile, "Finally, we're going to give out the Outstanding Contribution Award. This time, the only one who got it is our class." Outstanding Contribution Award? Isn't this award only given out once a year, and the winners are not only limited to students, but also all the teachers in the school? How can it be given to a student in the elementary school? Chapter 932. The school's Outstanding Contribution Award was the highest honor in Chaos School. In the past, it was only given to students and teachers who had made great contributions to the school. This kind of contribution was mainly given to students who had won glory for the school, or teachers who had made important research and inventions. According to the usual practice, the selection was usually only given to students and teachers in the high school. The students in the elementary school were still young, so they obviously couldn't make the Outstanding Contribution Award. But now, Teacher Luna actually said that this year's Outstanding Contribution Award would be given to a student in Class 2. This made many people think that there was something wrong with their ears. How is that possible? That was the only thought in everyone's mind. This certificate is so big. It's so beautiful. Amy looked at the certificate in Luna's hand, and her eyes lit up. Outstanding Contribution Award sounds a little cool. Meg was also a little confused. He didn't know what this award meant, but that didn't stop him from being happy. Luna wasn't surprised by the parents' reaction, because she had a similar expression when she first received the notice. She raised her voice and said loudly, "The winner of this year's Outstanding Contribution Award is Student Amy." Everyone's gaze turned to Amy in unison. Apart from being shocked, there was also a hint of realization. If there was one student in Class 2 who was qualified to say that she had made an outstanding contribution to Chaos School, then it was indeed only Amy. Of course, not every parent knew about the challenge match and the meaning behind it. They couldn't understand what kind of outstanding contribution this cute half-elf girl, who looked even younger than their own children, had made to Chaos School to be able to receive the Outstanding Contribution Award voted by the Chaos School Committee. Amy was also stunned. She looked up at Meg and asked softly, "So, Father, did I get the last certificate?" "Yes, that certificate belongs to you." Meg nodded with a proud smile on his face. Luna looked at Amy and said with a smile, "In the challenge match more than a month ago, student Amy made an outstanding contribution to defeating the challengers from the Roth Empire. She ended Chaos School's 4 consecutive years of defeat and won a precious honor for Chaos School. Because of that, the school committee unanimously agreed to give the Outstanding Contribution Award to student Amy as a form of encouragement. Now, let's invite student Amy to come up to the stage to receive the award. Go." Meg patted Amy's shoulder gently and smiled. Millimeter. Amy jumped down from her chair and walked to the podium with her short legs. She tiptoed to take the certificate from Luna's hands and raised it in front of her, completely covering her upper body. After a while, she seemed to feel that this wasn't enough. She stuck her little head out from the side and smiled happily at everyone. There was a round of applause from below the stage, especially from the children who had watched the match. They were all certain that Amy deserved this certificate. "Amy is awesome," Daphne exclaimed happily, her little face full of joy. "Amy is indeed super awesome." Ignatsu also clapped his little hands excitedly. "See, it's not that Amy doesn't have one. She just took the biggest one." Bonnie glanced at Ignatsu, and her gaze gradually turned cold. "Little brat, if you don't get one next year, I'll beat your father up too." "What does this have to do with me?" Shozo, who was still playing with the seeds in his hands, shivered and said innocently, "It's your fault if you don't teach your children well." You only know how to play with your seeds all day long. When have you ever cared about your children or your family? If you're so capable, you can go with them. Bonnie glared at Shozo fiercely. Shozo was instantly stunned. He shrunk his head and looked at Ignatsu and earnestly said, "Son, you have to learn hard next year. Otherwise, both of our butts will suffer." "It's okay, father. I'm already used to it." Ignatsu looked at Shozo pitifully. "Thank you." Amy thanked Luna, and then jumped down from the podium with the certificate. She jumped into the arms of Meg and Sally, and happily said, "Father, Mother, I got the certificate." "That's great," Meg said with a smile as he patted Amy's head. Sally's body stiffened, but she was quickly infected by Amy's happiness. What an obedient and adorable child. Although she wasn't her real mother, she felt a little enlightened at this moment. She looked at the smiling Meg and the happy Amy in his arms. If all of this was real, this family of 3 didn't seem too bad. After Meg received the most important certificate in Chaos School, the atmosphere in the classroom became a little strange. Compared to the School Contribution Award, the other awards were more or less important. Although the parents tried to make themselves look more natural, the atmosphere was still a little strange when they looked at the certificate in Amy's arms. There was a commotion and uproar in the other classrooms. Apparently, the form teachers of the various classes had also announced who would receive the School Contribution Award this year. This was the first time in Chaos School's 100 years of existence that a student from the elementary class had received the School Contribution Award. In the principal's office, the balding dean looked at Novan and said, "Principal, it seems that there are still a lot of doubts about awarding the School Contribution Award to Amy. Aren't we being too hasty?" Novan stood at the window with a smile and said, "Amy's contribution to Chaos School is more than what they see. If it weren't for her, why would the Crassus build a magic room in Chaos School? Why would they teach the students melee magic? This is something that even the disciples of the Magus Tower don't learn." The dean fell silent. After a while, he hesitated and said, "We know all of this, but they don't. Since when do we need to explain Chaos School's matters to others? Don't forget, Chaos School's matters are Chaos School's matters. Even the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple can't interfere." Novan pursed his lips and coldly said, "Tell those old fogies that if they really did contribute to the school, everyone can see it. This award won't be given to those fellows who are racking their brains to scam funding from the higher-ups." The dean's expression changed slightly. After a while, he nodded and said, "Okay." Then, he turned and left. In the quiet principal's office, Novan looked at the teaching building not far away, and sighed. That old fogey Crassus didn't want this award. I have no choice but to give it to that little fellow. Chapter 933. Meg also sensed the unfriendly atmosphere around him. He felt a little helpless. What could he do? It wasn't his fault that his daughter was too outstanding. How could he refuse her? This feels great." Meg smiled as he resisted the envious gazes. He was in a better mood than when he received his admission letter. Luna also sensed the awkward atmosphere in the classroom. She smiled and said, "Congratulations to those who have been rewarded for their hard work. I also encourage all of you to work harder." Next up is parent-child time. Parents are usually busy with work and rarely have the opportunity to be with their children. The school is taking advantage of the parent-teacher conference to allow parents to gather by their children's side. We hope that parents and children can have a more friendly and in-depth relationship. Some children and parents have prepared performances for this parent-teacher conference. Let's enjoy their performances. Hearing Luna's words, the parents withdrew their gazes and spontaneously cleared the tables and chairs in the middle of the classroom. The children and parents who had signed up for the performance began to perform on stage. The unprofessional performances of the children and parents drew a burst of cheerful laughter from the crowd. The atmosphere gradually eased and became harmonious again. It was inevitable that they would be envious of the achievements of other children, but after all, the children were still their own. This kind of family interaction was rare, so the parents quickly immersed themselves in the singing and dancing. "Father, are we going to perform Spring is Here?" Amy looked up at Meg expectantly. Sally also looked at Meg with a hint of a smile in her eyes. If Meg also went on stage, she wouldn't mind performing Spring is Here as well. This can't do. Meg looked at Amy's expectant gaze. In the end, his rationality prevailed over his impulsiveness. She wanted him to perform the Gokuraku Jodo. Was the female outfit ready? If the host wants, the system will provide a full range of female outfits delivered to the host's door. In addition, the host can choose any female outfit for free. The system's excited voice sounded. P2E. This wasn't about the female outfit at all. In any case, he couldn't perform it. He had to save face. Meg rolled his eyes. This system really knew how to respond to anything. All right. Amy was a little disappointed. Then she turned to Sally and asked expectantly, "Mother, can you dance with me?" Sally felt her heart tremble as she was stared at by the big blue eyes and heard the soft voice calling her mother. She couldn't help but nod. "Mother, you're the best," Amy said happily as she threw herself into Sally's arms. She was so happy to be pampered. Sally had a doting smile on her face as she gently stroked the little girl's head. Even if she could only be Amy's mother for one day, she would still be happy. After returning to the wind forest, she would have to do many things. She was afraid that she would no longer have such a relaxed and comfortable life, and she would no longer have such a cute little fellow calling her mother. Thinking of this, Sally's gaze became even gentler. Since that was the case, why not enjoy these last happy moments? Meg looked at Sally and felt that this girl had suddenly become a little different. She was clearly a cold girl, but when she hugged Amy, she gave him a feeling of motherly love. This moment of harmony even made him feel that she was Amy's mother. What a good girl. Meg sighed in his heart. Then, he thought of Irina. Then, he calmed down. The performance was very simple and down-to-earth, but it was full of childlike interest. Even Meg enjoyed watching it. He never thought that a person who could fall asleep at a concert would one day be able to watch a performance by a small class of children and laugh in the audience. It's probably because she's getting old, Meg thought to himself. Then, he bought a small subwoofer speaker from the system. He still needed a player to play Gokuraku Jodo. The performance that had been registered in advance was quickly finished. A few children dragged their parents onto the stage to perform a few more acts. Only then did the lively atmosphere die down a little. Is there anyone else who wants to bring their parents to perform for everyone? Luna looked at everyone encouragingly. Teacher Luna, I want to perform Spring is Here with my mother. Amy raised her little hand. Luna looked at Amy and Sally and smiled. Okay, then let's invite our little Amy and her mother to perform Spring is Here for everyone. Sally stood up graciously and walked to the center of the classroom with Amy. Applause rang out. Everyone looked at this extremely good-looking pair of mother and daughter, and they were all curious about what kind of performance they would perform. Elves were famous for being good at singing and dancing. Dancing requires some music. This is not a monster, but a player. Children, don't be scared. Meg took out the mini speaker that had just arrived and reminded them with a smile. Then, he pressed the play button. The lively and joyful drum beats of Gokuraku Jodo sounded. Amy and Sally began to dance. Their light steps, just the right amount of strength, and precise and elegant movements were all pleasing to the eye. Amy is so good. She's like a little butterfly. Daphne clasped her hands in front of her chest, and her eyes were full of stars. It's so beautiful. The parents and children couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Compared to the previous performances, Amy and Sally's dance was too professional. What was even more curious was how that small cylinder could produce such a high-pitched and beautiful music. Could it be that there was a little person hiding inside it? After one song, Sally and Amy smiled and greeted everyone before returning to their seats. The applause was thunderous and genuine. Everyone had been completely won over by Amy and Sally's dance. It was really difficult to be jealous of such little girls. After the applause died down, Luna asked again with a smile. After confirming that no one was going to perform again, she announced that it was time for parent-child free time. Some parents started to distribute the snacks they had brought, and some gave out exquisite little gifts. The children who received the snacks and small gifts had happy smiles on their faces. This was probably their favorite part of the dance. Amy's arms were full of snacks and small gifts as she looked at Meg expectantly and asked, "Father, did you prepare gifts for the children?" Chapter 934. When Meg pulled out the folding grill from under the black cloth and took out a box of beef kebabs, the noisy classroom suddenly fell silent. Everyone looked at the grill that Meg had set up and the fresh beef in the incubator with peculiar expressions on their faces. They had attended many parent-teacher conferences, but this was the first time they had heard of someone bringing a grill to school. Was he preparing to roast meat for the children? The teachers were also trying hard not to laugh. What was going on? A parent-teacher conference turning into a barbecue event. Mr. Meg. Luna wanted to say something, but stopped. Although she couldn't say what was wrong, she still felt that it was a little strange. Meg also realized that his beef kebabs were a little inappropriate, but since he had already brought them, it would be weird to bring them back. He could only brace himself and say, "Teacher Luna, I prepared some beef kebabs for the children. Can we roast them outside? Beef kebabs are better when roasted on the spot." He really wants to roast beef for the children on the spot. Everyone roared with laughter. This was probably the most difficult request a parent had ever made in a parent-teacher conference. "Did Mr. Mack misunderstand what I said this morning?" George muttered to himself with a strange expression on his face. "Honey, what did you say to Mr. Mack this morning?" Miranda asked in a small voice. "I said that parents usually bring snacks and gifts for the children. Maybe Mr. Mack's idea of snacks is beef kebabs." George shrugged, but a smile soon appeared on his face. "However, we might be in for a treat today." This. Luna was a little confused. She had never encountered such a situation before, nor had she heard of it from other teachers. According to the school's rules, there was no rule forbidding parents from bringing roasted meat to the parent-teacher conference. However, this was a school after all, and it seemed a little inappropriate to roast meat at school. This made Luna a little confused. "My father's beef kebabs are super delicious. You can't find any better in the world," Amy said proudly to the children. "Mommy, I want to eat beef kebabs. I want to eat too. I want to eat too." After being tempted by Amy and imagining the piping hot barbecue, the children couldn't stay calm anymore. The half-bald lingua franca teacher smiled and said, "Ms. Luna, I think Mr. Meg's suggestion is very interesting. Didn't the school say that we can't have a barbecue during the parent-teacher conference? Why don't we set a precedent?" "That's right. It's rare for our class to receive this year's school contribution award. This is an honor that the kindergarten has never received before." The teacher nodded in agreement. Luna looked at the enthusiastic students and the smiling Meg. She hesitated for a moment before nodding with a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Meg. All right." With Luna's permission, Meg carried the grill and beef out of the classroom. He did not forget to turn around and say to Amy, "Amy, I need your help. I'm happy to be of service." Amy skipped after him, her little face full of smiles. It was really a blessing to be able to eat delicious beef kebabs at school. Class, too, was on the first floor, and there was an open space outside the door. Meg set up the grill in the open space and placed the various condiments and sauces on the grill. The children and parents in the classroom poked their heads out and looked curiously through the windows and doors. "Amy, use a small fireball to burn all the charcoal red," Meg said as he pointed to the smokeless charcoal in the grill. "Okay." Amy nodded. A purple-red flame appeared in her palm and condensed into a small fireball, which she threw into the pile of charcoal. The flame lit up and went out. In the blink of an eye, all the smokeless charcoal in the grill had been ignited. It was bright red and radiated heat evenly. Sally stood to the side and watched with a smile. She couldn't help much with the kebabs, but she could help distribute them to the children after they were done. "Wow, magic." The children looked at this scene with amazement and admiration on their faces. For them, magic was still a distant thing, but Amy could already make a fireball with her fingers. "Very good. Thank you, Amy," Meg said with a smile. Sure enough, it was much faster to let Amy light the fire than to use alcohol or something like that. Moreover, The intensity of the charcoal fire was just right, so it was suitable to be used directly for barbecuing, saving a lot of time. Barbecuing meat directly outdoors is completely unhygienic. Also, we don't know if the source of the beef is clean and healthy. Our children and I will never eat barbecued meat like this. A thin man with slicked back hair and shiny hair wax, who was dressed very well, curled his lips and said, "Yeah, we still have to pay attention to the food we give our children. Our children are never allowed to eat this outside. Even if they eat outside, they have to bring their own tableware." A young woman in a long green dress sitting beside him chimed in. She had a chubby little boy in her arms, and her eyes were full of love. "Millimeter, I won't eat it." The little boy, Joseph, nodded firmly. He then asked in a small voice, "Mother, can I have 3 fried chickens when we go back later?" Joseph's parents' words also made some parents concerned. Even though Amy's father had good intentions, every child was their treasure, so the parents were a little hesitant about whether they should let their children eat this barbecued meat. "Pay attention. Mr. Mac is much more particular than you. Can you find another restaurant in Chaos City that is cleaner than Amy's?" George sneered as he looked at the couple. He was looking at Meg, who had already begun to put the kebabs on the grill, with an expectant look on his face. "Looks like I have to work harder. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't even be able to see her heels." Palmer, who was sitting by the window, thought to himself as he looked at the certificate in Amy's hands. "There shouldn't be a problem, right?" Luna looked in the direction of the principal's office with a worried expression. Even though the school didn't stipulate this, she was the first class teacher to allow parents to have barbecued meat in the school. The marinated beef kebabs were placed on the hot grill, and oil seeped out of the juicy beef, making a beautiful sizzling sound. The aroma of roast beef gradually began to waft through the air, and became stronger and stronger as it spread in all directions. Chapter 935. The rich aroma wafted through the air, and almost everyone in the school building could smell the roast beef. They couldn't help but exclaim in admiration as they tried to find the source of the aroma. "Let me tell you, this is the worst batch of students I've ever taught. Even the kids in the lower class have won the school's contribution award, but your children are still transferring books and pens and not studying." The bald homeroom teacher of Class 6, 2, who was nearing retirement, was lecturing the children and parents in the classroom on the 6th floor. As one of the oldest teachers in Chaos School, many of the parents in the classroom were his students, so they naturally didn't dare to refute him. They could only listen to his lecture with their children, and also experience being lectured by their homeroom teacher again. However, there was a small commotion in the originally quiet classroom. The aroma was like a kitten's paw, gently scratching their hearts. The students and parents couldn't help but look out of the classroom. The aroma was coming from outside, and it smelled like roast beef. However, this was Chaos School, and it wasn't time for the cafeteria to open yet. Who would be roasting beef in school? And during a parent-teacher conference? Who's roasting the meat? It smells so good. Yeah, I'm hungry just by smelling it. The students and parents whispered among themselves, full of curiosity. They even forgot about their homeroom teacher, Hamadan, who was famous for his strictness and iron rule. Hamadan's eyes suddenly became stern. Very few people dared to whisper when he was speaking, not even their parents. Then, he also smelled the aroma of roast beef. His eyes lit up, but his brows were tightly furrowed. As he walked out of the classroom, he murmured, "Who dares to roast beef in the school? And, it smells so good." The same thing happened in all the classrooms in the kindergarten. The teachers in the strict classes walked out into the hallways, and the students and parents in the relaxed classes also rushed out into the hallways, trying to find that mouth-watering aroma. It's just roast beef. Why is the aroma so tempting? Is this really roast beef? I've eaten roast beef so many times, but I've never smelled anything like this before. Amy's father is so handsome. It's like his magic. Ma, I want to eat. Class 2 was directly facing Mag's grill, so they could smell the strongest aroma of the grill. He didn't sense any greasy or pungent smell, only the purest fragrance. It didn't make any sense. The children and their parents had already fallen in love with him. Looking at the kebabs that Meg was flipping deftly in his hands, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. The worries in the hearts of the parents were swept away. At this moment, they were thinking about whether they would be able to eat a kebab other than their children. There were quite a lot of kebabs on the grill, and they wondered if one of them would belong to them. At the same time, the parents began to look at Mag in a different light. At first, he thought that it would be a bronze-ranked player, but he did not expect it to be a king-ranked player. Gulp, Joseph swallowed a mouthful of saliva as his chubby stomach rumbled twice. He raised his head to look at his mother, who also couldn't help but secretly swallow a mouthful of saliva, and softly said, "Mother, can I take back what I said just now?" This. Joseph's mother glanced at his father, Bevis, and didn't dare to agree. No matter how tempting the aroma is, it's not as clean and hygienic as a proper restaurant. Joseph, as a descendant of nobility, you have to learn to restrain yourself. Bevis looked at Joseph, paused, and said, "If you can resist it, I'll buy you 3 fried chicken today." "Really?" Joseph's eyes lit up, and he immediately nodded his little head and said, "Then I won't eat, I want 3 fried chicken." There it is. The other people in the teaching building finally found the source of the disturbing aroma. Their gazes fell on the grill in front of Meg. They could see the large number of kebabs being flipped in Meg's hands, and then brushed with the sauce. The tempting aroma was coming from there. Oh my God! Someone is actually roasting beef at a parent-teacher conference. This parent is probably crazy, right? He's not crazy, but I'm going crazy. Didn't we say we're here for the parent-teacher conference? Why is he torturing me like this? Everyone was surprised, and they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Isn't that little student Amy who won the school's contribution award? It's her. Could it be that the person roasting the kebabs is her father? That beautiful elf sister standing next to her is her mother. She has a beautiful mother and a father who can cook. I'm so envious. Soon, another student recognized Amy, and it caused a new wave of envy. Meg placed the large number of kebabs in his hands in the low-temperature section, and said with a smile, "All right, the first round of kebabs is for the children and teachers. Can a few parents come out and help distribute them? Let's do it." Gyurge and his wife were the first to stand up and walk out of the door. Soon, a few other parents spontaneously came forward to help distribute the kebabs. Joseph doesn't need it. Bevis rejected the kebabs that Gyurge handed to Joseph. I don't want it. Joseph's gaze moved away from the kebabs with difficulty, and he muttered in his heart, "Fried chicken, fried chicken, fried chicken." Gyurge didn't force him. He shrugged and handed the kebabs in his hands to the child next to him. "Children, the kebabs are still a little hot. Remember to blow on them before eating. Be careful not to burn yourself." Meg didn't forget to remind them. He walked over to Luna and the other teachers with a few kebabs in his hands, and said with a smile, "Teachers, have a taste too. I'm drooling just from smelling the aroma. We're in for a treat today." The language teacher took a kebab and took a bite. The kebabs were still a little hot. The language teacher's eyes widened, and he almost couldn't help but vomit. However, the burning sensation on the tip of his tongue was quickly replaced by the deliciousness that followed. The slightly charred skin and the garlic-flavored sauce first melted in his mouth. The garlic aroma that usually assaulted his nose was particularly gentle and delicious at this moment, making him salivate. After chewing carefully, the tender kebabs melted in his mouth. The aroma of garlic and meat wafted out from the meat, and the deliciousness bloomed in his mouth instantly. With every bite, he could feel his taste buds cheering, and he simply couldn't stop eating. After swallowing the kebabs, the language teacher couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh, it's really unbelievably delicious. I've never eaten such delicious food before." The children took a bite of the kebabs, and for a moment, they were full of praise. Chapter 936. The faces of the children who were eating the kebabs were brimming with happy smiles. There was probably nothing more delightful in this world than enjoying delicious food. Deliciousness didn't need to be described with words. Just looking at the children's expressions was enough. The parents sat beside their children with smiles on their faces. At the same time, they looked at Meg with some admiration. When the children went up on stage to receive the award, they didn't seem as happy and blissful as they were now. Meg's culinary skills were really amazing. She's so lucky. Her husband is not only handsome and gentle, but his culinary skills are also so good. It's really enviable. The women looked at Sally with eyes full of envy. Then they looked at the man sitting beside them. He was only in his 30s, but his figure was already completely out of shape. He usually didn't do anything at home, let alone cook. This comparison was simply infuriating. Meg didn't know that he had inexplicably become the role model of a good man in the hearts of women. He also didn't know that he had become the public enemy of men because of a kebab. However, looking at the children who were eating happily, he also had a smile on his face and began the second round of kebabs. Father. Joseph didn't know how many times he had swallowed his saliva. He looked up at Bevis with longing in his eyes. It's already been distributed, Bevis said expressionlessly. His throat moved, and there was some annoyance in his eyes. How could this guy's kebabs be so delicious? It could make all the children eat so happily. Joseph, the kebabs are really delicious. It's really a pity that you can't eat them. The little boy sitting at the side had his mouth full of oil. He looked at Joseph with pity and then took another bite of beef and chewed happily. Sigh. Joseph sighed. There was once a kebab placed in front of him and he didn't cherish it. It was only after he lost it that he regretted it. If God could give him a chance to start over, he would definitely say, "Please have another kebab." The children and the teacher are all eating. It shouldn't be a problem. Moreover, everyone is eating. It doesn't seem right if only our family doesn't eat. Joseph's mother whispered as she looked at Bevis. The rich fragrance floating in the air was mouthwatering, but her stubborn husband made things difficult for her. Bevis looked at the smiling children and parents. The family of 3 did look a little strange. After a moment of silence, he said, "You guys eat. I'm not eating." Joseph abruptly jumped up from his chair and ran toward György, who was about to leave with the remaining 2 kebabs in his hands. "Uncle György," he yelled as he ran toward György. "Give me a bunch. I want to eat too." György turned around to look at the chubby Joseph, and a smile appeared on his face as he handed a kebab to him. "Thank you." Joseph gave his thanks and trotted back to his seat with the kebab in hand. He cautiously glanced at Bevis and hesitantly handed the kebab to him. He whispered, "Father, why don't you have a bite first?" "I'm not eating," Bevis refused coldly and turned his gaze to the other side of the window. "You eat it, Joseph." His mother touched Joseph's head and smiled. She then looked at Bevis helplessly. Her husband was good at everything, but he was too stubborn and prideful. Joseph nodded and took a bite of the beef. His eyes lit up as he chewed quickly with his chubby cheeks. The expression on his chubby face became extremely happy and radiant. After swallowing a piece of beef, Joseph exclaimed, "Wow, it's so delicious. I don't think there's anything better than this in the world. Even fried chicken can't compare to it. Looks like it's really delicious." Even Joseph's favorite fried chicken pales in comparison, Joseph's mother thought to herself. Joseph's mother thought to herself as she looked at Mag, who was still grilling beef kebabs with an earnest expression. Both his technique and demeanor exuded a sense of professionalism, and the kitchenware and ingredients used were all quite clean. As such, she began to re-evaluate her previous assessment of Mag. Joseph took another look at Bevis and handed the kebab to his mother. He whispered, "Mother, you should try it too. It's really delicious." "Okay." His mother hesitated for a moment, but still lowered her head and took a small bite of the beef. The sauce on the surface of the beef and the delicious gravy instantly awakened her taste buds. She chewed lightly, and the gravy splashed in her mouth, colliding with the sauce and condiments to create an incredible taste. It was as if a thunderbolt fireball had exploded in her mouth, and then turned into countless thunderbolt fireballs. The taste had completely exploded. "Oh!" Joseph's mother's face lit up immediately. Words couldn't describe the taste. It was amazing. She was born into a noble family in Rodu, and had tasted many delicious restaurants in Rodu. However, she had never tasted such delicious food. She couldn't help but be immersed in it. Bevis snuck a glance at his wife from the corner of his eyes. His throat moved uncontrollably as he thought doubtfully, it's just a kebab of beef. Can it really be so delicious? But this aroma is indeed extraordinary. Even Duca's restaurant can't smell this aroma, Bevis thought to himself. He shifted his gaze away from the kebab in Joseph's hand. But I've already said those words. I can't eat it now even if I want to. This is for the parents. Please distribute it among yourselves, Meg said with a smile as the second round of kebabs was quickly completed. The parents, who were already waiting anxiously, were all excited. If it weren't for the fact that they were too embarrassed, they would have snatched it from their children. Luckily, Mr. Mag was considerate enough to prepare a portion for them. Do you want it? Gyurge asked with a smile as he walked over to Joseph's family with the kebab in his hand. Joseph's mother reached out to take a kebab, and then smiled. My husband, thank you. Before she could finish her sentence, Bevis had already reached out to take the kebab from Gyurge's hand. Seems like he changed his mind. Gyurge shrugged and continued walking forward. Joseph and his mother turned to look at Bevis at the same time. Their expressions were a little strange. You're right. Everyone is eating. If I'm the only one who doesn't eat, it will seem strange. This is not in line with our humble upbringing. It may also cause Joseph to be isolated because of this, Bevis said calmly. So, although it may not be very clean, I've decided to force myself to take a bite. After saying that, he took a bite of the kebab. Chapter 937. What's going on? The commotion in the elementary school building had also attracted the attention of the administration building. Dean, who had just finished a heart-to-heart talk with a few professors, furrowed his brows. It wasn't unusual for parent-teacher conferences to be lively. The school's original intention was to allow children and parents to interact more and cultivate feelings. However, listening to the noise now, it didn't seem to be the case. It was more like a bustling market. Dean, I think it's caused by a parent roasting beef kebabs in the elementary school, an assistant teacher said with a strange expression. Beef kebabs? Which muddle-headed parent would actually roast beef in a place like the school? Dean raised his eyebrows and exclaimed, could it be because the barbecue was on fire? Otherwise, why would there be such a commotion? There's no fire. It's because the smell of the roast meat is too fragrant. The students and parents can't sit still anymore, the assistant said with a sigh. The assistant said with some emotion, that wonderful fragrance is really too amazing. Many teachers in the administrative building specially rushed over. Nonsense. As a teacher, how can you be so disrespectful? Dean waved his sleeves and walked to the door with a dark expression. The homeroom teacher of elementary school is Luna, right? Looks like she's gotten a little carried away after being praised by the principal. Now that she's causing such a commotion, we'll become a laughingstock. I have to talk to her. Dean, the principal. The assistant said weakly as he watched Dean disappear through the door. He's also there. Dean walked to the entrance of elementary school with a dark expression. When he was about to interrogate the principal, he suddenly saw the principal standing in front of the grill with a beef kebab in his hand. He said with a smile, "Children, we would like to thank Mr. Meg for bringing us such a delicious feast. This small beef kebab is the embodiment of the best cooking in Chaos City. Even the king of the Roth Empire didn't get to taste this kebab at his birthday banquet. This Amy's father won the Best Chef award at the king's birthday banquet not long ago. The restaurant he opened in Aden Square is called Immerse. I'm sure some of the customers have heard of it, right? Amazing." After hearing Novan's words, everyone looked at Meg in a different light. They felt that the beef kebab in their hands had become heavier. He's actually the chef who attended the king's birthday banquet. And he won the Best Chef award. Bevis's eyes were filled with shock. He thought of what he had said before, and blushed. He lowered his head and took a bite of beef. Oh, he's indeed the chef that even the king's praises. This beef is too delicious. Bevis praised in his heart. Father seems to like it too. This is a terrible thing. Adults really like to deceive people. Their mouths say they don't want it, but their bodies are honest. Joseph looked at Bevis with some disappointment. Mammis, I think it's a very famous restaurant in Aden Square recently. I've heard from my friends that you have to wait for a long time to go there, but it's still full every day. Also, the price is even more expensive than Duca's restaurant. He's the boss and the head chef. Joseph's mother was also looking at Mag with astonishment on her face. Mr. Mac, of course I'm very familiar with it. I feel uncomfortable all over if I don't go to Mammis for a day. A few of Mammis regulars continued Novan's words, and caused a round of laughter. You're too kind, Principal. It's my honor to be able to make a beef kebab for the children and teachers. Meg looked up at the crowd in the corridor, and apologetically said, also, my actions were too reckless. I've disrupted the order of the parent-teacher conference. Dean looked at the scene, and his expression was completely frozen. He had come to denounce the culprit, but he bumped into the principal praising the culprit. And this culprit was the father of Amy, who had just won the school's contribution award. You'll have to ask our dean if you've disrupted the order. Novan turned to Dean with a smile, and said, Dean, you also came because of the aroma, right? Do you want to try the beef kebab that Mr. Meg just made, and then we can talk about this disruption? Of course I have to try the food that the principal praised. Dean controlled his expression, and walked up with a smile. However, this smile was still very intimidating in the eyes of the students. The scariest person in Chaos School was not Principal Novan, but Dean, who was known as the Smiling Tiger. Luna was a little nervous. Not only did the students call him the Smiling Tiger, but the teachers also called him the Smiling Tiger in private. Even the teachers were afraid of him. Meg's kebab had caused such a huge commotion, and he wasn't here to denounce them, was he? Please have a taste, Dean. Meg handed the last kebab to Dean with a smile. The kebab was already done, and the students and parents were late for the kebab. The worst that could happen was that his tools would be confiscated, so he wasn't that nervous. Dean accepted the kebab and took a bite. He wasn't expecting much at first, but after the kebab entered his mouth, his eyes immediately lit up. He had never tasted anything like this before, and the taste buds on the tip of his tongue were jumping with joy. The more he chewed, the more fragrant the kebab became. This feeling was so blissful. After finishing the kebab in one go, Dean still wanted more. He gave Meg a thumbs up, and said, You're right, Principal. This kebab is indeed a delicious feast. I can understand why everyone is attracted by the aroma. It is indeed irresistible. Everyone laughed upon hearing that. They didn't think that the Smiling Tiger would have a reasonable side to him. Chapter 938. The parent-teacher conference ended in a relatively harmonious atmosphere. Meg folded up the barbecue rack that Sally had cooled and cleaned, wrapped it in a black cloth, and carried it on his back. Holding Amy's hand, he followed the crowd to the school gate. Goodbye, Uncle Meg. Bye-bye, Amy. Amy, remember to ask your father to cook for us next time. Along the way, the children of Class 2 greeted Meg and Amy. Obviously, they had been completely won over by Meg's cooking. The parent-teacher conference is so fun. I love it. Amy held Meg's hand with her left hand and Sally's with her right hand with a happy smile on her face. Meg and Sally looked at each other and smiled at the same time. Thank you, Meg looked at Sally and said earnestly. You're welcome. Sally looked down at Amy and smiled. This is also an interesting and wonderful experience for me. Sister Aisha, it would be great if you could live with us forever. Amy looked up at Sally and smiled. Sally's heart trembled at the sight of Ari's innocent smile, and she fell into a momentary daze. That's right. If I could live a carefree and happy life like this, then it would indeed be very satisfying. But, she smiled and didn't say anything. Amy didn't mind Sally's silence. Looking at her face, she continued, Sister Aisha, you look so beautiful when you smile. Smile more every day in the future. Yes, I will. Sally was slightly taken aback, and then nodded. She had indeed smiled a lot today. Mag easily pushed his bicycle out of the horse-drawn carriages, much to the envy of all of the horse-drawn carriage drivers. Hold on tight, we're going. Amy sat on the crossbar of the bicycle, and Sally sat on the back seat. Meg reminded them and then stepped hard on the pedals, and the bicycle rushed out with a whoosh. Sally's body swayed, and she subconsciously reached out and hugged Meg's waist. Meg's body stiffened. Although he was no longer a teenager, being hugged by a fairy-like girl sitting on the back seat of the bicycle reminded him of his youth. Thinking back, he felt a little happy, and then he gradually relaxed. Sally also quickly realized that her actions were a little inappropriate, and a blush immediately appeared on her face. She wanted to withdraw her hand, but she could feel the scorching heat from his abs under his white shirt, as well as the solid back in front of her. After a moment of hesitation, she didn't withdraw her hand in the end. Instead, she gently pressed her face against his back. "We're going to leave soon. Perhaps we won't see each other again in this lifetime. It's a pity that I wasn't the first to meet such a man. Even if I do meet him now, I still won't be able to stay by his side. Then let's just hug each other tightly for a while." Sally closed her eyes and smiled. The bicycle stopped in front of Amy's, and Sally alighted from it. Her expression had returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Meg was also at ease. He carried Amy down from the crossbar of the bicycle, opened the door, and carried the bicycle inside. He had to start preparing the ingredients for tonight's dinner. "Did the parent-teacher conference go smoothly today? Aisha, did you really pretend to be Amy's mother? Did anyone see through you?" Yabemia asked curiously as soon as they entered the door. Barbara and Phyllis were also very curious about this. Amy picked up Ugly Duckling with a smile, and said, "No, big sister Aisha was very good at acting. I didn't see through you at all. Because I didn't have to do anything the whole time." Sally spread her hands, and said helplessly, "I got the biggest award in class today. Do you guys want to see it?" Amy ran to the bicycle and took out the big award that she had rolled up. Everyone gathered around curiously, and praised Amy again. Meg, who had just changed into his chef's uniform, shook his head with a smile. What a harmonious and loving scene. After entering the kitchen, Mag saw slices of roast duck laid out on the cutting table. They were sliced from left to right in a sequential order, and he could clearly see that there was an improvement. At first, the flaky skin was damaged, and the thickness was uneven. Gradually, he could see that the skin was completely attached to the duck meat, and the thickness of the duck meat gradually became even. By the 10th duck, the thickness of the duck meat was almost indistinguishable. Every piece of duck meat was in perfect condition. It was an amazing skill. Meg looked back at Phyllis, who had appeared at the kitchen door, and said with a smile, 108 slices. Not a single piece of duck meat was wasted. It's perfect. Sigh, the daily life of a hack is indeed enviable. Meg sighed in his heart. He was indeed very envious. In order to master the skill of slicing duck, he had sliced more than 5,000 ducks in the test field for the god of cookery. That was how he had been able to slice a duck perfectly into 108 slices. But now, Phyllis had only used an afternoon to practice on 10 roast ducks, and she had successfully mastered the skill of slicing duck. Comparing oneself to others was simply infuriating. Can I really do it? Phyllis's face lit up with surprise. She even found it hard to believe. Yes, Phyllis. From today onwards, the task of slicing roast ducks will be handed over to you. I believe you have the ability to do it well. Meg nodded. Although he was envious, it was undoubtedly a good thing for the restaurant that Phyllis could master the skill of slicing roast ducks so quickly. I'll do my best. Phyllis looked into Meg's eyes, which were filled with trust, and nodded solemnly. Meg's roast beef kebabs at Chaos School this afternoon had become the biggest joke of the year. Furthermore, Amy had received an exceptional school contribution award, so it had naturally attracted a lot of attention. As a result, the number of customers lining up outside the restaurant had increased explosively, and the line had already begun to circle around the square. Many of the parents who had been brought to tears by the aroma of the roast beef kebabs had brought their wives and children to the restaurant for the sake of tasting the food that had been praised to the heavens by the principal and the dean of students. Of course, after entering the restaurant, the families who weren't very well off all wore reluctant expressions after seeing the prices on the menu. Some of them excused themselves, saying that they didn't have any food that they liked, while others bought a beef kebab for their children. As for the parents who could afford the price, they happily sat down and waited for the food to be served. Joseph's family of 3 was currently sitting at a table in the corner of the restaurant. Chapter 939. With Phyllis's help, Meg's efficiency increased again. 100 roast ducks could feed 200 customers, so the number of customers served at Amy's had increased to 500. Of course, this didn't include the customers who ate beef kebabs and largi ruggiamo on the way. Everything else was fine, but Meg felt sorry for Yarbemia, who was serving the dishes with trembling hands, and Sally, who was receiving so much money that her hands went limp. Damn it, I was so emotional today that I forgot to put up a recruitment notice. Mag looked on at the departing customers, and a very important thought suddenly occurred to him. Sally was going to be leaving after today. With the restaurant's current situation, he was afraid that he would have to stop working. Meg looked at Sally, who was clearing the table, and sighed silently. As expected, he still didn't want her to leave. He was even subconsciously avoiding this matter. However, Sally was going to leave in the end. He would put up a recruitment notice tomorrow and reduce the number of customers. He would slowly increase the number of employees when he found suitable ones. Meg still didn't want to put too many waiters in the restaurant. He didn't like the feeling of being too crowded. After the dinner service, the finishing work was quickly done. Yarbemia held Barbara's arm and looked at Sally with a smile. Aisha, let's go back. It's so cold tonight. I'm going back a little later. Sally shook her head slightly. She looked at Yarbemia and Barbara and hesitated for a moment. Then she went up to them and hugged them. She smiled and said, "It's so nice to meet you." Yarbemia and Barbara looked at Sally in confusion. They didn't know why she suddenly had such a strange feeling. "I also think it's so nice to meet you." Yarbemia nodded and said with a smile, "Then come back early. It's so cold outside. Boss, we'll go back first. Let's go." Barbara took a deep look at Sally, raised her hand, and left hand in hand with Yarbemia and Phyllis. "Are you sure you don't want to say goodbye to them formally?" Meg stood at the entrance of the restaurant and looked at Sally, who was watching the two leave. "That's pretty good. At least the only thing left in each other's memories are smiles, right?" Sally shook her head before turning to Mag with a smile, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Mag, regardless of whether it was agreeing to let me stay, or taking care of me during this period of time, or keeping my secret, I have to thank you for everything." Meg looked into Sally's eyes and said with a smile, "I should be the one thanking you, Miss Sally. Thank you for working hard every day. Thank you for being Amy's mother today. Thank you for being friends with me all this time. You." Sally's eyes flashed with surprise. "How did you know?" "It was a coincidence." Meg shrugged. "Then should I thank you again?" Sally asked with a smile. "No, I should be the one thanking you for not killing me." Meg shook his head with a smile. He then pulled out an intricate music box from behind him. Within the transparent crystal cover was a half-elf girl in a purple dress. There was also a gold-threaded purse, which he handed to Sally. "What's this?" Sally's eyes lit up at the sight of the music box. She reached out to take it, and the half-elf girl was surprisingly Amy. Meg looked at Sally with a gentle expression, and said, "The departure gift is the same as your salary for this month. The function buttons are the same as Amy's. The dances and songs that you've learned are also included. There are also some new songs and dances that you can slowly study. If you can't move them one day, take them out to dry in the sun. They'll be able to move again in half a day." Sally looked at Meg with reddened eyes. After a while, she said, "Thank you. Come back when you're free. It's my treat." Meg's smile was still warm and bright. Sally looked at Meg's smile in a daze. The first time she pushed open the door to Amy's, she was greeted with the same smile. "Okay." She nodded and put away the music box and the purse. She looked past Meg at the restaurant. This was the place where she had spent most of her time after she ran away from home. She had seen it grow from a sporadic customer to a bustling restaurant. She had experienced the excitement of trying to get on the charts, and also the danger of being attacked. It was a warm and cozy place like home. "Say goodbye to Amy for me." Sally retracted her gaze and looked at Meg again with a smile. "I think I'll be back. We'll all be waiting for you." Meg also smiled. Goodbye. Sally turned and slowly walked away. Goodbye, Meg said softly as he stood at the door until his thin figure completely disappeared into the night. What a terrible winter. Meg tightened his clothes and entered the restaurant. The door slowly closed behind him, and the moonlight shone down on the amber wine in the wine glass, making it appear particularly cold. He then took a sip. Meg calmly washed the wine glass and hung it back on the glass rack. He then turned off all of the lights as if nothing had happened, and made his way toward the stairs. As soon as Meg reached the staircase, Amy, who was sitting on the stairs with Ugly Duckling in her arms, asked in a quiet voice, "Father, is big sister Aisha not coming back?" Meg looked at Amy and made his way over to her with a smile. He patted her head gently, and said in a gentle voice, "She said she'll come back, but it might not be tomorrow." "Then what about the day after tomorrow?" Amy looked up at Meg. "Perhaps it'll be even later." Meg shook his head. He squatted down to look at Amy with a smile, and said, "Big sister Aisha said that she also likes you very much, so she'll definitely come back to see you." A smile reappeared on Amy's face, but it was quickly replaced by a dejected look as she said, "But I didn't tell big sister Aisha that I also like her very much. She knows. She's an adult, and she knows that Amy also likes her very much." "Really? But I'm definitely going to tell her in person the next time we meet." On a tall mountain outside Chaos City, Elliot looked at Sally with a smile, and said, "Have you all bid farewell to each other?" Sally looked into the distance, and calmly replied, "You know that I'm not good at saying goodbyes." Elliot looked at Sally, and his lips moved. After a while, he said, "Sally, you must hate me very much, right?" Sally didn't reply to him. Instead, she continued to look into the distance with a calm expression, and asked, "Father, are we bandits? We're elves born from nature, and we're protected by the god of life. How could we be bandits?" Elliot's brows furrowed slightly. Sally turned to look into Elliot's eyes, and calmly asked, "But what we're doing now is no different from bandits." Elliot looked into Sally's eyes, and opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to respond. Chapter 940. You still can't do it. What is this thing? Old friend, can you still hold on? In the spacious cave, the branches and leaves of the tree of life had already turned yellow. The dark brown color had spread from the roots all the way up, and almost covered the entire tree trunk. There was no sign of life at all. Wisps of black smoke seeped out of the branches, carrying with them the terrifying aura of death. Irina sat with her legs crossed under the tree, and her face had become extremely pale due to the constant use of magic and mental strength. She looked up at the tree of life, and her face had become extremely pale. The branches of the tree of life swayed weakly, and gently swept over Irina's head. The cave entrance was glowing with a faint green light, and it seemed that it was about to open. "I'm not leaving. If even you are invaded by the aura of death, the elven race will be completely abandoned by the goddess of life, and we will fall into the endless abyss." Irina shook her head with a determined expression as she said, "I don't know when Mother will come out of seclusion. Before she comes out, I have to protect you and the wind forest." The branches of the tree of life swayed and emitted a whimpering sound as if they were crying. "Soon, soon. Tonight, I will be able to obtain powerful energy, and the Norland continent will bow before my feet." Outside the cave, a full moon hung high in the sky. Borge looked in the direction of the cave with a crazed expression. Thin black lines crawled from his neck to his face, making his entire face appear extremely sinister. Black mist emanated from his body, and all kinds of ghostly faces appeared behind him. It was as if something was about to emerge from his body. "What's this?" Helena, who was looking at the stars in the starry cave abode, looked in the direction of the Tree of Life's cave with a bewildered expression. The stars embedded in the ceiling of the cave suddenly flickered, and it was as if a dark cloud had suddenly surged in, causing all the starlight to dim. Helena closed her eyes with a grave expression, and a huge crystal ball that was emitting purplish golden light slowly rose into the air. It started to spin rapidly in the cave, and the purplish golden light illuminated her face. "This is a very bad omen. The elven race is going to be doomed. It's even worse than the war among species." Helena's face turned pale, and her trembling voice echoed in the cave. Thick black clouds gathered from nowhere and pressed down on the sky above the wind forest. It was so heavy that it was hard to breathe. The elites of the elf tribe raised their heads to look at the heavy black clouds. Their faces were alert and their hearts were heavy. No one knew what was going on, but they were sure that the black clouds were abnormal and made them feel uncomfortable. "Come, God of Death, descend. I'm willing to be your servant and your spokesperson on the Norland continent." Borge raised his hands above his head with a crazed look on his face. A clap of thunder rang out, and a black lightning bolt shot out from the dark clouds, striking towards the tree of life in the cave. Scram! Irina roared. A beam of holy light shot out and collided with the black lightning. It exploded and was annihilated at the same time. Another clap of thunder sounded. Dense bolts of lightning flew out from the dark clouds and fell like raindrops. All of them were aimed at the tree of life. The silent tree of life suddenly lit up with a dazzling green light. Countless branches stood up and formed a round shield above Irina's head. Boom, boom, boom. Bolts of black lightning struck the round shield, and the branches were severed and charred black. The black patterns on the tree trunk seemed to have come alive, and began to spread toward the branches in a frenzy. The green light became dimmer and dimmer, but the round shield above Irina's head didn't budge at all. It didn't back down at all. Old friend. Irina's eyes glistened with tears, but the magic caster's staff in her hand couldn't light up anymore. Come on. Come on. This world is going to be mine. Borge's body was already trembling. His crimson eyes were like that of a demon's. A hideous evil spirit condensed behind him and looked at him with a covetous expression. How dare these fellows interfere with my farming? Don't they know whose world this is? I'll spit a mouthful of salt soda water at them. A line of small words floated across Meg's mind. However, because the words were too small, Meg didn't notice them. At the same time, a torrential rain suddenly fell from the sky in the wind forest. SSSSS, heavy rain fell from the black clouds like a torrential downpour. Each raindrop was like a sharp arrow, easily piercing through the thick black clouds. It was also like sparks landing on a foam box. The evil dark clouds seemed to have met their scariest nemesis, and were instantly annihilated upon contact with the raindrops. The dark clouds were almost completely annihilated in the blink of an eye. What? Borge looked up at this scene with disbelief in his eyes. However, the black shadow behind him suddenly let out a shrill cry of fear. The raindrops landed on Borge's body, and it was like a ladle of water being poured into a pot of oil, making a sizzling sound. Borge raised his head and let out a shrill cry. The black patterns that had already crawled all over his face seemed to have been cut open by a knife, and then forcibly peeled off. The pain made him go crazy. The shadow behind him kept changing its form under the baptism of the rain, but it still couldn't avoid the rain. It was like a clay figure, and it kept shrinking under the washing of the rain until it completely disappeared. This is... Irina looked up in surprise. The black lightning that fell on the round shield suddenly disappeared, and what came next was a torrential downpour. The raindrops fell on the tree of life, and the black patterns that had already spread to the paper seemed to have met their scariest nemesis, and were instantly annihilated. Then, the tree trunk, which she and the tree of life hadn't been able to resist these days, was rapidly disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The withered branches of the tree of life began to recover their green color under the nourishment of the rain. The broken branches regrew, and the almost completely fallen leaves sprouted new buds. The light green light illuminated the cave, and the countless branches swayed slightly, glowing with vitality. This is the god of life manifesting. Irina's eyes were also filled with surprise and joy at the sight of this. The branches of the tree of life swayed happily, and spots of green light gathered together and surged toward the weak Irina. The torrential rain gradually stopped. Borge knelt on the ground with a thud, and his body was covered in blood. He looked up at the sky, and shouted with indignation, Why? Just a little bit more, and my plan would have succeeded. Compared to my farming plan, a small matter like invading another world is nothing. A line of words floated across Meg's mind. Chapter 941. It's nothing. I just went to apply fertilizer and sprinkled some non-toxic pesticides. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Meg raised an eyebrow and scrutinized it. Didn't you say that your ingredients are all natural? Why are you using fertilizer and pesticides? This makes me wonder if your ingredients really meet the supply standards and are worth the price. I saved your wife while applying fertilizer. You're not thanking me, but you're actually questioning the safety of my ingredients. You're simply unreasonable. A line of words smaller than an ant floated past, and the system said righteously, "Host, please don't question my professionalism in farming. No one is more professional than me in this matter, including Grandpa Yuan Longping. By the way, aren't you a gourmet system?" Meg asked with a complicated expression. "Huh. I'm saying that even if it's just a side job, I can still do it to the best of my ability. The most professional. The best supplier of ingredients. Of course I'm a god of cookery system. But when it comes to planting vegetables, alright, you can shut up now. I'm not interested in farming." Mag cut off the system's words, and asked, "System, do you have any methods that can allow me to level up quickly? Like fighting monsters or something?" "I'm not interested in leveling up or fighting monsters, either," the system said proudly. Meg's eyelids twitched as he resisted the urge to complain, and he asked, "Then system, how can I level up quickly through farming?" "Farming is farming. It has nothing to do with leveling up," the system replied calmly. "Meg, motherfucker. Host, please mind your manners," the system reminded. "Piss off." Meg rolled his eyes and ignored the system. He looked at Amy, who had fallen asleep with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and kissed her demon gently. Then, he tiptoed out of the room and went to the balcony. He took out his long sword and began to practice swordsmanship. The trip to Rodu and the Wind Forest made Meg realize the importance of power. In the face of absolute power, even the system couldn't do anything. Although RZ was very strong, it was obviously unrealistic to rely only on RZ when facing a truly powerful level 10 expert. Whether it was the Wizard Tower or the elves who had imprisoned Irina, they were not enemies that Z could deal with. He had to become stronger and return to Alex's peak strength. Only then would he be able to survive the upcoming chaotic times. Of course, it was not enough for him to be strong alone. He needed some helpers. A plan had already formed in his mind, but he wasn't sure if it could really be carried out successfully. The black heavy sword slashed out noiselessly in the darkness. It was as nimble as a spirit snake and as fast as lightning. After negotiating with the system, Meg added a silencing and anti-peeping barrier to the balcony. Although it cost Meg a lot of gold coins, it was very important for Meg to have a safe training ground now. An hour later, Meg, who was covered in sweat, stopped practicing. He put away his long sword and went downstairs to take a quick shower. Then, he lay down on the bed and got ready to sleep. Reminder: the delicious cuisine competition will start from tomorrow onwards. Host, please pay attention to the time. Just as Meg was about to fall asleep, the system's voice sounded. Meg opened his eyes immediately. He frowned and muttered to himself, "Looks like the eggplant with garlic sauce will be released tomorrow. The taste is still a little worse than the one I had last time. I haven't gotten anyone to try it yet, but it shouldn't be a big problem, right?" The next day, Meg woke up early in the morning. He made several servings of eggplant with garlic sauce in the kitchen. After tasting them one by one, he confirmed the final version. Although it was more delicious than most of the eggplant with garlic sauce he had eaten in his previous life, it was still a little worse than the eggplant with garlic sauce he had eaten in that tiny restaurant in his memory. There should be no problem with the recipe. Meg could only assume that the eggplant with garlic sauce had become more delicious because of time and memory. He couldn't find a way to improve it for the time being. Eggplant with garlic sauce. I hope you can shine in this different world. It's up to you whether I should dress up as a girl and dance to the Elysium. Meg threw all the eggplant with garlic sauce he had made into the kitchen waste bin and prepared to go out to the morning market to buy some eggplants. Knock, knock. There was a knock on the door. Phyllis is here so early? Meg untied his apron and hung it aside. He made his way to the door with a hint of surprise on his face. He had woken up an hour early today, so there was still some time before the appointment time that he had made with Phyllis. Phyllis. Meg's voice abruptly trailed off as soon as he opened the door. He looked at the two people, or to be more precise, two elves, standing at the entrance of the restaurant. A peculiar expression appeared on his face as he asked, Miss Shirley, Anna, why are you here so early? The person who had arrived wasn't Phyllis. Instead, it was Blower, or Shirley, who was holding Anna's hand. He was dressed in female clothing, and he was now an astonishingly beautiful crossdresser. He was most likely the most beautiful crossdresser that Meg had ever seen. No matter how he looked at him, he was completely flawless. No matter how he looked at him, he was a very natural and beautiful woman, including his voluptuous breasts. Meg wasn't sure what he had stuffed into his breasts, but there was no way that coconut shells and steamed buns could reach such a level of richness. However, silicone seemed to be a little too advanced. Could it be that a crossdresser had invented silicone in this world to make himself look more natural? Of course, none of that was important. What was important was that Meg wanted to know why Blower had brought Anna here so early in the morning. Could it be that Sally had left, so he had to leave as well? Good morning, Uncle Meg, Anna greeted with a smile as she looked at Meg. Blower looked at Meg with a reluctant expression, and said, I'm here to take over her shift. She should have told you in advance, right? It was a pleasant female voice that was gentle but not seductive, and it was very suitable for his current disposition. Meg faltered upon hearing this. He felt as if he had misheard, and hesitated for a moment before asking, Who did you say you're here to take over her shift? Is there a second person who needs to take over her shift? Blower raised an eyebrow as he looked at Meg. Meg's eyes widened upon hearing this. He turned to Blower with a peculiar expression, and asked, Did Aisha ask you to come here? Did she ask you to take over her shift? I didn't want to be a waitress, but she's going to do something big, so I have to do a good job for her. Otherwise, I won't be able to live with myself. Blower nodded before heaving a forlorn sigh with a pained expression. With my beauty, I'm the most beautiful person in the world. It's such a waste of my beauty and youth to be reduced to a waitress. Anna, Meg repressed the urge to retort as he reappraised Shirley. He didn't think that Sally would find a successor for him before she left. As expected, she really was a considerate girl. In terms of looks, setting aside the fact that she was a crossdresser, Shirley was indeed one of those stunningly beautiful women. She was perfect for a waitress role. However, looks alone weren't enough. With the current workload in the restaurant, if she didn't have the ability to match her looks, then she would only be a vase in the restaurant. That wasn't what Meg needed. Mr. Meg, I know I'm very beautiful, but I really have no interest in men. Blower looked at Meg with a calm expression. I also have no interest in crossdressers. Meg grumbled internally. At the same time, he discovered that he had indeed lost his composure a little. He averted his gaze from Shirley's fake breasts, and turned to Blower with a smile as he said, I'm very grateful to Miss Shirley for coming to the restaurant at Aisha's request. However, if you want to work at Amy's, then I have to conduct some tests on you to ensure that you have the ability to take on this job. With my beauty, do I still need to undergo a test? That doesn't make sense. Blower was a little surprised to hear Meg's response. Beauty can be used to make a living, but Amy still needs a very capable waitress, Meg said with a smile. This guy's narcissism was truly speechless. I hate it when people say that I only have beauty. You can test me to whatever extent you want. Blower looked at Meg with a hint of fighting spirit in his eyes. Please come in. Meg pushed the door open to allow Blower and Anna in. After closing the door, Mag went into the kitchen and brought out a few bowls and plates of different shapes. He placed them on the table casually before pouring a spoonful of oil onto the bowls, plates, and table. He turned to Blower and said, Young Mistress Shirley, please clean up these bowls and plates as well as the table in the shortest time possible. I really hate oil stains on my delicate hands, but if that's all, then it's too easy for me. Blower looked at the mess on the table with a nonchalant expression. He took 2 steps forward and waved a hand through the air, upon which all of the bowls and plates on the table fell onto a tray. A green light swept over the surface of the table, and all of the oil stains instantly melted away as if they had encountered their nemesis. A wave of water flowed over the table, and the greasy surface of the table was instantly rejuvenated. Did you add a plant cleaner to this? Meg gently ran his finger over the surface of the table, and couldn't detect any oil stains. There was also a faint fragrance of plants wafting through the air, and he was very pleased with the cleanliness level. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.